right, I see Christine is on now. I know you had some technical issues. Thank you for joining, and thank you everybody for being patient. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is a budget meeting of the Board of Education. I want to thank you for joining our virtual meeting. We'll go ahead with the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I'll do the preliminaries. So Michael, do you have a flag for us? There we go. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, so this is a remote meeting pursuant to the Governor's Order, Executive Order 7B. We're recording the meeting. It is will be posted on our YouTube page as well as off of the board page. Agenda for the meeting is on our Board Docs website. You can get there by going to greenwichschools.org, clicking on Board of Education, scrolling down and to meetings. Click in the blue box, it'll take you to Board Docs, and you can get the agenda for tonight's meeting. We are taking public comments tonight as part of our budget meeting. Those comments should necessarily be geared towards the budget, so those will be done a little later in the meeting. In addition, members of the community can always send an email to all of the Board of Education members by a single email address. That is boardofedmembers@greenwich.k12.ct.us. Again, Board of Ed members at greenwich.k12.ct.us. So tonight is going to be discussion by and among the superintendent, board members, her team, as well as the external consultants for the JC project. I'll note now the documents for Old Greenwich were not completed in time to make it onto tonight's agenda. When we get to that, we'll make a motion to table it to our December 17th meeting and take it up then. I'd ask members to please stay on mute when not speaking. Ask participants to state their name each and every time they speak, unless I've called your name. We'll be using the raise the hand function, so please do that so I can call on people in turn. I'd ask people to try to keep their comments concise into the item on the agenda. And for any votes, as usual, we will be taking a roll call. So with that, can we get a motion to approve the meeting agenda? Ms. Hirsch, is there a second?
Make a motion.
Ms. Downey, thank you. All right, go ahead and take a roll call vote. So Bernstein is a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And Scher.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move right on to our action items. So the first item is the Julian Curtis School Education Specifications. This is an action item. Mr. Kelly, would you like to make the motion?
Yes, sir. I would like to approve the Julian Curtis education specs as presented.
Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and second that motion. I think the former parents of JC students were very happy to have this item before us for hopefully a vote tonight. Dr. Jones, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
The ed specs as presented, there's 4 options. So
now the options are not actually part of the ed specs. That's a separate document.
Thank you. That's just making notes for the minutes.
Exactly. They just present different variations on the theme, but basically the ed specs dictate what goes into the building. The options just show you the potential for layouts of that building. And I think Dr. Jones and Mr. Costa can help clarify that. Go ahead, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. I'll just point out that on the ed spec, they did put in red the feedback that they got from the board, just to make it easy for you to follow along. And I'll turn it over to Joe Costa, and I think Tina Greco is joining tonight as well, and Mike Berger.
Thank you, Dr. Jones, and good evening, Board of Ed. Appreciate you inviting us back here tonight. Tonight we're going to focus really our presentation on the education specifications, but we do want to show you the 3 options that we came up with as a result of the discussions that we had a couple of weeks ago. The team that I have with me tonight is going to present a lot of the information. Then what we're going to do is follow up with a cost comparison to help put some limits on the option and show you the different cost of each of those options. You know, about 2 weeks ago, we presented our original scheme, which was much more pared down than we did in the beginning of the spring. And at that meeting, we heard from Chairman Bernstein and others that that there should be some additional items in the ed spec. There were really two items. One was a general use science, which we called earth science and physics, which is about a 900 square foot space that could serve really all of the students and provide even at elementary school level a taste for science and some experimentation and get the feel to do science. That was one item. The other, while not necessarily a program element, was more of a desire to improve the circulation of the school by in essence closing the U and creating a loop so that when students move from one side of the building to the other side, the pathway would actually be shorter and it would save time and be more convenient. And what that did is it actually resulted in an enclosed courtyard, which now becomes an outdoor room that can serve a number of functions and a number of activities for the school, both ceremonial activities as well as places to study, places to do science and all kinds of things. But it would be a safe enclosed space that would be open to the sky. And we have a couple of different options to show you that. Tonight we have a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. I promise it'll be very short. I'd like to show you what we put together, if you don't mind.
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Do you guys see my screen yet?
Yep.
Yes?
Yes, we
Thank
see
you.
it, Joe.
You see it? Great. Okay, this will come up in a second. Okay, so as Dr. Jones mentioned, the education specifications have been slightly modified, and any of the changes that we made to the document were actually highlighted in red. The intent is once the board approves the ed spec, we'll turn those red lines into the normal color font so that it becomes a unified document. But what we wanted to do is highlight that in red so at a glance you can see exactly what was changed in the documents, and it's clear. It's the Earth Science Physics Lab, one at 900 square feet, and then the open air courtyard, which is framed by a new circulation path. At this point, I want to hand it over to Tina to talk a little bit more in detail about those program elements, and then we'll jump right into the concepts. Tina, would you like to start?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Joe. And thanks again for having us here. So I'm actually on the phone. This is an aerial looking down at the school, just to give everybody our bearings. The bottom is the front entry. And then what we're going to do is Mike's going to walk through the concepts in just a moment. Next slide, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
So as Joe was mentioning, we made the changes based on the discussions at the last meeting. Nothing else has changed. The same, the projected enrollment is the same. Next slide. And then just as a reminder, this slide, which you saw before, I think it was not the last meeting, but the meeting before last, where we listed what the project would include, which is building system improvements, and they're listed above: the ADA accessibility, heating and ventilation, security and access control, life safety protection, hazardous material abatement, all part of alterations, and then the program improvements. So we have all the same ones that we started with, but then as Joe mentioned, there's an earth science physics lab, one at 900 square feet that's added. And then this open air courtyard, which results from improved circulation, a circulation loop that allows you to connect the entire building. And now Mike's gonna run through the different sketches, different concepts.
Thanks, Tina. You can go to the next slide, Joe, please. Okay, just as a quick refresher, we're going to take a real quick at what we presented. I think last month you guys saw it for the first time, which included 3 small additions, but it did not include that connecting corridor or the science room that Joe and Tina mentioned. Next slide, please. And this just highlights the 3 locations of the additions. If you click it again, those will disappear. And real quick on the bottom right, we had a nice kind of early childhood center with a pre-K and K with a nice breakout space isolated on the end of the school. Obviously, the accessibility improvements throughout the school, starting at the front door. On this level, in addition to pre-K and K, we had 3 first grade classrooms. We relocated the media center to the center of the school and pushed the cafeteria up where the media center currently is with a small addition. Again, relocating the kitchen and receiving area to this location, so you no longer have to drag trash and deliveries through the school. It can come directly into the receiving area and into the kitchen. And then also some of those supporting spaces, small group spaces, which are highlighted in this level. Okay, next floor. Upstairs, and just as a reminder, anything white means that we're barely touching it. The name of the game was really to minimize unnecessary expensive construction. So upstairs is mostly a relabeling job. So this houses three classrooms for 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th, and 5th grade up on this upper level. Music rooms stay where they are. Advanced learning program is located on the left-hand corner. We're increasing, adding a couple more faculty toilet rooms. The red box, I should mention, was the elevator, making the school fully accessible. And then on the right-hand corner, we're going to create some more usable floor space. It's kind of a awkward space to be in. We had a couple meetings in that room, so we're going to raise the roof on that space and really maximize the use of that part of the building. So now we can jump right into 3 options, and Mr. Bernstein was correct. So these really are potential solutions to the ed spec. So what these add, they're very similar to that first scheme that you guys are familiar with, but what these do, they add that general science classroom and also that connecting corridor to create that loop circulation on the ground level of the school. So this option also includes 3 modest additions. On the bottom right-hand side, it still preserves the pre-K and K kind of isolated early childhood center on the lower right-hand corner of the school. But the addition grew a little bit. We added another kindergarten classroom because that science classroom, as you can see highlighted there in green, is in part of the existing building right now. It's currently a kindergarten classroom. So we thought the science classroom might make sense to be located on the ground level. The media center is still located in the center of the school. The cafeteria and kitchen are located in the same location. We think it works really well. And then the connecting corridor in this option is located right there. Thank you, Joe. And what this does, it creates a more intimate sized courtyard. We see this potentially as mostly a hardscaped courtyard with some raised planting, really a modest sized courtyard. Upstairs, it would remain the same. Actually, we're only showing one floor. Upstairs remains the same actually as the current option that you have. So everything upstairs would remain the same in all these alternative options. Okay, next option 2.
B.
This option B. Again, it's similar to the option A, but what we wanted to do is create a larger courtyard, enclosed courtyard. So if you click it again, Joe, this still does preserve the early childhood center on the lower right-hand corner. Science is located in the same location as it was. Now that we're locating that connecting corridor to the right, you potentially can create a science storage room or prep area directly adjacent to the science lab, which is nice. The courtyard is a nice generous size now, so you can still preserve that raised patio that you have now. We understand they use it for ceremonies and graduations and special occasions. So that can be modified to still take place within that courtyard with family and guests and students congregating and fitting within that courtyard. The loop circulation does plug back into the cafeteria and dining area, creating that loop circulation. We should also mention within that connecting corridor, we're showing hints of breakout spaces. As we mentioned, the 21st century education, educational spaces outside the classrooms are highly desired. So we'd like to take advantage of that connecting corridor to utilize that as more than just circulation, but also breakout spaces. And then, as I mentioned, upstairs would remain identical to the previous options. And if you go to option C, so we also took a look at option C, which is really more of a variation of option B. If you click it again, Joe, what this does, this makes a little bit more of an efficient plan Option B has that part of that corridor that doesn't have really any program on either side of it. So it's all pure circulation. So what this does, this takes those kindergarten and pre-K classrooms and wraps those up against that, lines them up against the corridor. Makes a more efficient building, as you'll see, a little bit less square footage. But what it does, it allows other students to circulate kind of past these classrooms. So you no longer have that isolated pre-K and K kind of wing, right? That which no one was really circulating through. But it still gives them their own wing, you know, off the beaten path, but others can circulate through it, connecting up to a commons atelier, which is attached to the cafeteria. And again, science and its science storage room are located in the same location. I think we have a summary sheet as the next slide. Yep, so this sums up. So in summary, as presented last month, three additions with no connecting corridor. Option A, you have a small courtyard, but with the improved circulation with a dedicated kind of more isolated pre-K and K wing. Option B is very similar to A, but has a larger, possibly more usable enclosed courtyard. And then option C eliminates that private isolated wing with a pre-K and K, makes it more efficient kind of loop circulation, more efficient plan, and couples that atelier commons with the dining hall. Joe, you want to talk to the next slide?
Sure. Within your packets, you had this table which had a comparison of the cost of each of the different options, starting with the original budget of around 25.5 million. And, you know, incrementally, the options really add about $1 million to $1.6 million in costs, and that accounts for the additional square footage as well as the connecting corridor costs. It's not a tremendous increase, but it is some increase in the overall budget. These costs are really based on conceptual sketches at this point. Obviously, there's a lot more refinement that has to be made on these particular numbers, but I think they represent a comparative cost for each of the options. And then what we did is we actually created a kind of a summary sheet which captures the costs and the difference in square footage. And you can see it's slightly larger. It's not a giant number of square feet, but it does add some cost to the job. At this point, we'd like to conclude our presentation and open it up to any questions that the board may have about either the ed spec or the options or the budgets or anything else that you want to ask us tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costa. One thing I want to ask you before I turn it over to Dr. Jones, because I think she was going to tell us which buildings already have science rooms. I think I noted on there, you've got some of the kindergarten spaces at 1,100 square feet. I think there's at least one of the existing classrooms is that size, but I thought where we're using 1,000 as our standard. So I see there you've got 1,100 square feet on the two rooms. And I have to go back into your ed spec to double check that. I don't know if that's just for drawing purposes or if that's what's in your ed spec.
I'd have to go back, Peter, and check the exact number, but typically the kindergarten and pre-K are slightly larger than the standard classrooms. Sometimes
the 1,000 is our standard.
Standard, yeah. Well, this particular 1,100 includes the toilet room, and it may be just a placeholder for the plans. And obviously that'll be adjusted as the design is developed.
Okay, because I'm looking at the ed spec document that's posted for the meeting, and I think you have it at 1,096 for the kindergarten rooms, including the toilets, but the pre-K at 1,000 with the toilets. So that may need to be adjusted.
Yeah, this is a diagram, obviously, Peter. It's still very preliminary.
Understood. And then I'm actually looking at the ed specs themselves.
Right. So the ed spec, the ed spec was listed as how much?
1,096 for the kindergarten.
Okay.
But we'll have our discussion and we can come back, and if we need to amend that, we can.
Right.
Hey, before we go further, Dr. Jones, I know a couple of board members had asked you about which buildings have existing science spaces. So if you could share that with us.
Yes, thank you very much. And I did get the question today from a couple of people. So I did mail you something also, email at around 5:30. And I know you may be busy and not have seen that. Out of our 11 buildings, if we take JC that we're talking about out of the remaining 10, 7 of them have science spaces. And some of them were built for the science space. And some of them goes back as far as like OG 8 years ago, PTA helped them establish and convert space to a science. So Parkway has science, Riverside New Lab, North Street, Ham Ave, OG, and Cos Cob. And the ones that do not have the science are JC, and then the remaining 3 are ISD, Glenville, and North Miami. So if JC moved forward, there would only be 3 without in the district right now.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, board members.
Peter?
Yep.
Peter, I wanted to circle back on the square footage question. The actual square footage of the existing kindergarten is actually 1,096 square feet. So that's an actual square footage of the existing rooms. The proposed pre-K is 1,000 because that doesn't exist. So we were trying to match existing and proposed. That's how that number came about.
Okay, I guess I understand that. If you're preserving the existing rooms, you're not going to go take 100
Right.
square feet out of them.
Right.
If you're
right.
adding new rooms, you would probably want to get them to this standard.
Yeah, we would pare that back down to the standard for the district, whether it's 1,000 or 1,100 or some other number.
It's if that haven't done this before, it's 1,000.
Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
board members, now is the time for discussion. So I'm looking for hands. Miss Downey.
First to raise. A couple of questions. Joe, I want to confirm one thing.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the roof, because we just did put a new roof on the building, because you made reference to kind of that space on the second floor, I want to confirm that we're not redoing the roof that was just recently done.
I can tell you, you're not going to do the roof that you just finished. What Mike was talking about was a little part of the building which we plan on actually raising the roof to provide a little bit more square footage, because right now those rooms are clipped ceilings. It's almost like an attic that you have at your house. So one of the ideas was to actually raise the plate height of that particular part of the building. This little yellow bump right here is the only part that we would touch. The rest of it is in perfect condition. It's a brand new roof. We wouldn't mess around
I
with
wanted
that.
to be sure. Yeah, like we don't spend a lot of money on it.
Yeah, no.
One question, and I don't know if this is just something that goes into the design process. If we talk about this connector, how does that affect egress and safe, from the building in the event, if we've got these courtyard and classrooms facing into it, is that the kind of thing that's just part of the architectural process, or kind of just talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. What happens is the state treats courtyards as a room, and a room that you have to be able to egress out of. If there was ever an emergency, a fire or something, we'd always have to allow students and occupants to leave the courtyard. So as you can see in Mike's sketch, he has doors that lead into a corridor, and then ultimately that lead out of the building. So that would be something that we would address as part of the code analysis and as part of the design of the building. It's done all the time. It's not a big deal.
Right, and but it's not something that we need to address tonight.
Oh no, this would be this is at conceptual level, but the plans do indicate in some doorways to get out of that space.
Yeah.
I
just want to talk about kind of when you guys were doing the feasibility study and this process, what kind of, up until our board meeting a couple of weeks ago, what kind of discussions were there about this connector or a science room?
Well, early on, at the very beginning, we did have a science room, and I think that one of our designs actually created the loop. And then when we pared back the program to do just the absolute minimum, as we were directed, we took away the the loop, and we took away the science, and that really shrunk the amount of square footage that we were adding to the building greatly. So that's how that happened.
Okay.
We're actually very happy to hear that you wanted science and that you wanted a courtyard, because we love courtyard buildings, especially at elementary schools. You basically get a free space that kids love walking through, and you can do all kinds of things in the courtyard. Science, you can do events, you can do reading time. There's all kinds of stuff that little kids love to go into courtyards.
Okay, thank you. No, it does. You're right. Makes it for
Yeah.
more space. Peter, this is maybe more of a question. Not, if, depending on people's points of views, if we're concerned about the additional cost of adding the science and the connector, do we have an option? Is there a pathway to make it and add it as an alternate, so that once we get the real numbers that come in, to be honest, if we're concerned about costs, and if we believe this extra, $1.5 million is problematic, can we do it? Can we do the ed specs in a way that we like to have it, but we don't mandate that we have it? Maybe Joe, maybe not having done school construction from this point, if you could educate some of us on that.
Sure, Peter, would you like me to answer from
Yeah, go
my
ahead.
perspective?
Sure.
As Peter mentioned, the last time, the ed specs become kind of a Bible for the design team as well as for the building committee. But another part of that is, of course, the fixed budget. And so it becomes the job of the architect as well as the building committee and the construction manager to meet whatever budget gets approved by the town. And so when we're going through the design process and we start coming up against the budgets, things like identifying bid alternates or other ways of value engineering or saving some money is a normal part of the process. And oftentimes we will have 4 or 5 bid alternates built into the project that can be considered on bid day, and whether they're accepted or rejected, it really becomes part of the discussion that the building committee would have, hopefully in conjunction with the Board of Ed. If it's something that you absolutely have to have, then you probably want to list it in the ed specs as they're shown right now, and that becomes a given that cannot be value engineered out or can be bid out as a separate ad alternate. It all
So
depends.
you're saying that this connector, I'm just using the connector because that's an easier. So if we absolutely, what if people are ambivalent about it, but we have it in the ed specs? No, I'm just asking, like, how does it work?
Well, if the object is to have a courtyard and an enclosure, and that becomes part of the ed spec, then it doesn't become a negotiable piece. It becomes part of the job, just like the science room or just like the 2 kindergarten rooms. The team would have to find other ways of saving money to bring the project back into budget.
But I think it's kind of hard because we don't really have the budget now. So we don't, these are best guesses, and we're talking about realistically, by the time architecture and engineering, we're not even doing this project for 2+ years. So, I mean, to be prudent, just trying to think of ways to accomplish what we want to accomplish in terms of accessibility, and the air quality and the really important things we have to have, like that, the musts versus the wants.
Right.
I'm trying to balance out how we do it.
Yeah, and I understand the dilemma that you're facing, and it becomes difficult because you're trying to make a decision that's got to stick for 2 or 3 years as the project rolls through the design and the approvals and the construction process, and a lot can change in 3 years.
Right. So that's why I was just trying, in whatever ways we can preserve our flexibility to get the project done and not derail it by putting things in there that make it too expensive.
Yeah. Now, there's been plenty of cases where building committees have had to go back to the board when they've come up with conditions like this and ask for changes to the ed spec. It's not impossible. If through the design process or through the cost estimating process, things become overly expensive and the money runs out, there's always the option of going back to your board and asking for the ed spec to be modified. We typically don't see that very often, but we have seen it on occasion.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's
Thank
always,
you.
even,
No.
yeah. Okay.
No, thank you, Joe. Don't worry. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you guys for sending us multiple different options here. I wanted to ask a quick question because I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. It looked to me from when you were showing us, what we had seen really was just the first level. Today you showed us also what the second level would look like with these additions. I just wanted to confirm the suggested corridor is only for the first floor. You're not adding a 2-story corridor?
That's correct.
That's correct. Yeah.
And so if there was interest in adding, for instance, because you gave us a cost of adding the corridor and the additional science lab, is there a possibility that you might have an option or to show us what the breakdown for adding just a science room or it would be without the corridor? If we're talking about costs,
Yeah.
I'm curious to see,
Yeah. The answer would be yes. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips right now, but that's pretty easy to calculate because it's all based on square footage, Ms. Hirsch. And, we certainly could, peel off the square footage associated with the connector or even add a second story connector if that's something that you want to consider as part of the program. I just don't have those numbers at my fingertips right now.
Okay, thanks. I just know it's we're looking at, that's why I said we're looking at 3 different options with 3 different costs, which adds somewhere between 1.1 to almost 2 million. And so that's why I was just trying to sort of assess.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Thank you. So I had if we were to, if I look at the specifications and how this is put together, is there a way to draw out from what has been proposed? If we scale this down to, for example, security, handicap accessibility, and safety and HVAC concerns, air quality issues. My concern is that the project is too much for now, and for now is spending, doing more than what is necessary given the other issues with respect to the schools across the district. And I'm not sure we're appropriately addressing, we're spending so much here that it handicaps our ability to actually address much needed issues at other schools because we're making this more than what it needs to be. I'm stuck on why we're adding classrooms, particularly when school enrollment is declining year over year, and the studies that were done in which we came up with a priority for how these schools were going to be refurbished, those estimates have not come to fruition. And particularly when we look at even Julian Curtis's numbers for this year in their enrollment, they're down. In fact, they're down 67 students this year. So if we were to, is there a way to break out from what we have presented to us that addresses ADA issues, HVAC issues, and other health and safety and accessibility issues?
I guess the only new program space in the original scheme that we showed last month were the 2 pre-K classrooms. Those are the only really new spaces, and it's to serve an additional population that's supposed to go to the school. So that was the only new space, and the rest of it was life safety, HVAC, cafeteria. I think was part of that because of the kitchen and the security issues. But the original option that we showed pretty much approximates what we would call just the necessity or the necessary improvements that we were directed to provide, except for the new space, which was the pre-K.
So, Tony, I have a question for you as to the science rooms. How often are the elementary school kids going into a science room? Because there's not a separate science teacher. So what are they doing in those rooms and how often are they going to them? And what's the curriculum involved that puts them into a science room as opposed to the things that they do otherwise? I know from my own personal experience that in elementary school, it's done in the classroom. So what is the added advantage to the science room?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we were in this discussion just today, really talking about next generation science standards and what really should be happening in science curriculum. And if you're in a building or in a district where it's done really, really well in elementary, you're using spaces like this a lot, because what a science, in a lot of places will call it a STEM lab for elementary, but what it allows is to be able to have those microscopes that are built for elementary children. You have all kinds of equipment available to children, and you don't have to equip every classroom, which, you know, in the older days, you pretty much had kits in every room. And that's when it started getting very expensive for science. So a lot of these science rooms now, the teachers can rotate through them, you know, everything is in there. And I think that's why you see that where our buildings, where it wasn't available during construction, they've converted space and done it because it's such an efficient and great way to teach science. And it's an area for us, I think we can continue to grow and expand on, in really making sure that we have, I think even coming out of COVID, it's even more so evident that we're going to be strong with our technology understanding for next generation. We need to make sure we really are enhancing and supporting in elementary hands-on learning for children. So they're incredibly valuable spaces.
So then my next, so I'd actually like to see the information from and get information from how often teachers from the other schools are in those science labs, because I'm not hearing about it and I'm not seeing it. So I'm curious how often. I also have reservations about the courtyard concept and how often it's being used versus how is that any different as opposed to using the plethora of lawn space and other outdoor space that this school has in and of it in itself. Also in an area that's guarded by, you know, surrounded by natural vegetation of trees, and what the purpose of the courtyard actually adds for the additional expense. I mean, if you look at the weather and rain around here, I'm just curious as to how often that's actually used for that time period, particularly when the elementary school students are on such a rigid time schedule. That do you actually see them, you know, spending the time that takes to traverse to the courtyard space in order to have a reading session and then to traverse back to the classroom? It takes a little while to move elementary school kids through a classroom. I can see that space for purposes of, you know, middle schools and high schools because they're free roaming, but elementary school kids are not free roaming. Everything is structured and very rigid. And that time space, the time it takes to get there, I'm not quite sure how often that space is utilized. And I know that particularly at North Miami, their own courtyard, they're not utilizing it as much as one would think. And it seems to be an expensive proposition.
Yeah, I would say during COVID, it's been a huge help. I will say this year, having some of those courtyards, but every building uses it a little bit different. It depends how the courtyard's designed. Are they doing, you know, plays in the courtyard? Are they going out for healthy reading and sun? And if we're not using them in some of our buildings as much, we probably should be. So that I think it needs to be, you know, part of the thinking, incorporating a courtyard actually into how do you use it effectively inside a building. And I know Mark had a small outside space also at Glenville, and they were revamping some of that last year. So he's welcome to chime in if he wants to speak from the elementary view.
Sure, Dr. Jones. When we built Glenville School, the interior courtyards served two purposes. The first was to make sure that all areas of the building had natural light. And so that was something that was sorely missed with our old design, because we had an old 1970s California open air school. So we had no windows. We didn't know what the weather was outside. And when we built the new school, we wanted to make sure that every part of the school had natural light cascading in through windows. The secondary function was to use it as an instructional space. And in one of our courtyards, we did turn it into an organic garden for a period of years, and that was very productive and tied to the science curriculum. And then just before I left, there was a transformation into more of a reading and exploration Zen garden. So there's many purposes for a courtyard. They do require upkeep and maintenance, but there's ways to make sure that that's low maintenance and low upkeep. But it does provide teachers with an opportunity to remove the barriers of their classroom walls and give children a different opportunity for learning.
So, Peter, if you'll let me, I have three more questions.
Would you mind if we actually went to another member and then
Sure.
circled back to you? Because you've gone on a little bit and we've got a couple hands up.
That's fine, but I do have three more questions. I'll raise my hand again.
Not a problem. Just toss your hand back up and I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Scher.
Yeah, the guys at Perkins Eastman, I wanted to repeat something you said because I want to be sure I heard it correctly. The designs you came up with were the specs that the committee gave you, correct?
The designs came out of a discussion of the additional ed specs per the last Board of Ed, as well as discussions with Dr. Jones.
Sorry, I wasn't clear. The original design.
The one that we did about a month or so ago. Yeah. The instructions there were to pare down the ed spec to the basic needs, with the exception of adding 2 classrooms for pre-K.
Okay.
So it was code, it was accessibility, it was HVAC, it was life safety, the health, all that kind of stuff.
So nobody asked you for an option that was just, let's do ADA, let's do, no one ever asked for an option that was, let's get the building fully accessible for the disabled, if we have any disabled students.
No.
Plus, hold on, plus getting the air in the building fixed, because that's an issue. And as well as this building has always, these buildings, just like North Miami, just like Riverside, same issue. Buildings built at this time all have undersized cafeterias for today's needs.
Mm-hmm.
So that needed to get addressed. The media center at the building is actually quite large today. It's just not optimally configured. None of them are, because they were originally built as libraries.
Right.
Actually, these buildings have the largest libraries, these 1925 buildings. They're much larger than some of the others, but it's got a computer lab at the back, which is not useful anymore when we put something in the hands of every student.
Mm-hmm.
So, but nobody asked you for that kind of spec, right?
Well, if I were to put my hand over these 2 classrooms right here, those, everything to the left would represent what you just described.
Yeah, but you got a bunch of little rooms that you have to reconfigure, right?
Well, yeah, because if you look at the administration suite, right, to deal with security and all that kind of stuff, it's going to displace a classroom, and that's why you add another classroom.
Yeah, I know. Those guys are all living in little. You should see the one at North Miami, and you should see the one at Riverside, right?
Yeah,
I get that Trish McGuire would like a more modern, admin suite.
It's right. It's the same
compared to what Mark had, which was a Taj Mahal built at Glenville. I get that part.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, that was a Perkins Eastman job, by the way.
It's a beautiful building.
It has a courtyard, and I remember clearly the original building. It was just terrible. I remember the boxes and the filing cabinets piled up just to create spaces.
Yeah. So you didn't have that kind of spec. I mean, look, this design is wonderful, right? And I appreciate that you guys can come up with a lot of different options. This design, actually, this spec is the same spec that was from 2018 in our master plan, which was you didn't do that work, but that job was, redesign the school. It was based on a set of capacity expectations that were dramatically higher than where we are now. We're about 500 students lower than the numbers that were in that plan across the district. This school being one of the ones that's acutely down in terms of capacity. Capacity is not just students, it's also classrooms, but it's pretty hard. We were also in this is all pre-COVID. So this design, we found our way back to the pre-COVID design at a lower cost than the projection. But we're still talking $27 million. And I don't know if we did something more modest. I mean, it'd be great to have a science room. That's a great thing. At the one at Coscob, as an example, is just because they were a really big school. And they didn't need all the capacity that was built in that school, and they converted a room. And it's great. There's other schools that are like that, have had the opportunity. Or there's newer buildings where we actually built one. It's great to have. The need to add pre-K is completely lost on me because we have so much capacity around the district. What I'm concerned about is that we have an assumption that's driving all of this in our facilities plan, which is all buildings will stay where they are and all current school zones will stay where they are. I've been on the board 10 years and I never want to touch redistricting. But other boards before us were more courageous. And this is long before me. And I'm sure it was incredibly unpopular, but they made the hard decisions to make the facility more efficiently use our buildings. And the one that bothers me the most is this project to me now seems to be very much of a want to have, not a need to have. And we're going to wind up comparing this and through kind of the manipulation of how it's been presented to us. We have OG, and OG is a similar situation. I mean, they're down 103 students in the last 3 years. So, that's a building that's going to wind up being oversized. But over there, they're not asking for any additional capacity. And the problem over there is that building is like New Lebanon. It's stuck in a corner. So there's no place to go. And it's surrounded by schools that are at capacity and busting at the seams. So I'm really worried about the trade-off between these two. You can go look at this project in isolation, and it looks great. And the local school community would love to have this. Looking at it in isolation, sure, I'd like to have this too. But I'm really concerned, and I think Ms. Downey's question is kind of getting at that. Ms. Kowalski's question is kind of getting at that. I'm concerned that this project is the pre-COVID project. It's the capacity before. It's the economic situation before we are now. And I take nothing from Perkins Eastman because you're just responding to our requirements. But I'm concerned that it's bigger than we can get done. And here's what I don't want to do. Because of the rigidity of the process, what happens downstream, which most parents don't understand, what happens with the Board of Estimate and Taxation, what happens with the first selectman in a capital projects prioritization, do not understand what happens when they go to the BET. I don't want to put out there a project that can't get approved. Because it's gonna take a year to run through that process, and if we have to come back and redo it, the process does not have the flexibility to do the add alternate, as as Ms. Downey asked. This will be the, I don't know, third, fourth, fifth major project I've been on the board doing. And I don't like that the process doesn't have flexibility, but it's the way it works. And I think we have to anticipate all that. So I love the design. Thank you for doing it. I see the price tag. I see it's gone up by 1.2 million at best. It's a beautiful project. I'm just wondering if, because right now we're talking about the spec, which is going to get locked in concrete through the vote of the board. I'm not sure this spec is something we can afford and we can get approved. But I'd like to hear the rest of the discussion on other board members' points of view.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to weigh in now with a couple of comments. One, if you go back to the 2018 Master Facilities Plan, this actually is not that design. That design was $42 million. This is coming in around half of that at about $21 million. This is dealing with the three main issues that we really wanted to deal with at that time, and I think are still absolutely necessary to deal with, which is ADA, health and safety, and air quality. This isn't about reconfiguring classrooms. And if you actually go back to the first pass we took at this in April, you can see they were rejiggering all sorts of classrooms, making spaces different sizes. There was a lot more work going on. There wasn't a dollar value on that presentation, but I do recall it being expensive in my mind. So this work that's been done is to start the value engineering process. It certainly isn't the end of it. A lot of it actually happens after you have a real complete design. At this point, you're looking at a concept, right? In my mind, it's a lot better than my back of the napkin drawing, but it's still not a design that you could work from. When you get to a 60% or an 80% design, you really get a better sense of what's possible and at what real cost. You'd have a professional estimator come in, and they've used one here, I'm sure, but without knowing the finer details of it, you really don't get that. Peter, you definitely hit one of the items on the head, which is the common spaces. They are undersized. They've been undersized for a long time. It's one of the reasons why JC popped. It's one of the reasons why Riverside is also on the list. New Lab actually had the smallest common spaces. We took care of that, but that still needs to be addressed. I think it's dangerous to look at the capacity this year as the bellwether for all years. We know we have students that are out of district for multiple reasons: private school, homeschooling, home pods, whatever that is. We do not know what it's going to look like next year, and it's really hard to say that this is the number that it's going to be. So I want to be very, very careful when we talk about capacity. Couple other points to make. We're really looking at the basic needs, as Joe said. The courtyard, it's interesting to me, and it was noted, all the schools use them differently. Go and look at the OG plan. It's absolutely an amazing element of that plan, and I think it's why I kept asking why we weren't thinking about that for JC. If you go and you look at what was presented in April, it did have that connector, and it used some of that space. And I think it's option C here, which puts the classrooms on the side of the connector, and that is actually the one that has the lowest square footage. So it was interesting to hear how you could do that. But again, these are just drawings. We cannot get wedded to any one of these, because once the building committee gets the ed spec and hires an architect, they'll come back to us with the design. This is nowhere near a final design, and I just can't keep stressing that. The science lab, 7 of 11 of our buildings have it at this point. NGSS is here to stay. I think it makes sense as we're revisiting our science curriculum to be forward thinking about this. This is a building that's about 80 years old at this point. This building, I think Joe, you had said to us that it looked like it was designed pre-war, but it was built post World War II. And if we want this building to be useful for the next 75 to 80 years, I think we need to be a little bit more forward thinking. Pre-K is another thing like that. When I got on the board, the director of the program at the time was so happy that she was able to consolidate the pre-K program in just a handful of schools. You know, it was my feeling then, and it's my feeling now, pre-K belongs in the neighborhood schools. Kids, especially kids that young, those kids in the birth to 3 program, we should not be trying to get them moved all around town. They should really be getting acclimated to the school they're going to be in. It makes sense to not be penny-wise and pound foolish when, you know, this is something that ought to exist. It used to exist at JC. I think they used the little building, the Millbank building at one point for pre-K. You know, it's time to figure that out, because at some point, by the way, some administration in Washington down the line is going to mandate universal pre-K. And at that point, we're going to be scrambling to fix our buildings. And it's the same with the ADA issue. You know, it's 30 years since the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's an abomination that we basically have 3 educational buildings and our administrative building we've not managed to face. How we have dodged a complaint about that, I do not know, but I think it's high time we fix that, as well as all of these other issues. With that, I will turn it over. I see Ms. Hirsch has her hand up, and we'll turn it over to you.
Well, I will say on the pre-K front, you know, I know that's, you know, we don't have a dedicated pre-K space sort of in mid-Greenwich. I mean, it has moved around. And I know the numbers of students who qualify to attend our preschool programs, students with learning needs, has certainly increased over the years. And I can say, and I don't know, Tony, maybe you have an answer for this, every year for as long as I have been in this school community, we turn away parents that want to enroll tuitioned students to our pre-K program. So, you know, I do see that there could be a need. It's certainly, you know, for our tuition students, we'd be able to fill seats there. But so, Tony, that's a question for you, which I'll come back to. But the second part of my question is, so I just want to know, I know we revamped our science curriculum to meet the NGSS standards. But, you know, does that new revamped curriculum support the consistent use of a science lab for grades K to 5?
Do you want me to answer both of those? So on the pre-K, we do have a lot of parents that apply for the lottery that don't get a spot. So that's the answer to that one. I think on our whole science, we want to really focus at a higher level on the hands-on aspect of science, especially in K-5. And I think that that's part of the work, and we hear that from our teachers. They need more science resources to really teach science highly effectively. So I think our curriculum supports it, but we do need the resources. And I think that's, again, why you've seen principals convert space when they didn't have it and work with PTAs if they could to make it happen, because they see a need for it.
So that leads me to ask, you know, ask the following question. You know, I like to make sure that all of our students have access to the same sorts of things. You know, and now we're talking about if we choose to add the science room here, we then have 3 other elementary schools that don't have space or don't have a science lab. And I'm just concerned that, you know, that those students are not being given the same access to science that the other, you know, students are. So, you know, that's to table, that's for future discussion, but it is something really to consider. If we are considering adding it here, we have 3 schools then that don't have that space, and we really need to figure out how to ensure that all of our students are having access to the curriculum in the same manner.
All right, Mr. Kelly.
Well, a lot of stuff that I was thinking about saying got said. I'm certainly in favor of the ed specs as they are, because I did make the motion. What I want to talk specifically about is the science room. Now, I'm rather surprised that people looking at the science room as an optional, as a want. I kind of feel it's certainly very important. And to Ms. Hirsch, you had mentioned 3 schools don't have science rooms. Now 7 schools do. And out of those 7 schools that do, some of those schools realized how important it was that they felt the need to convert a room into it. So they didn't have the opportunity to properly put a science room together. We here, certainly in the new construction in New Lebanon, we put in a specific science room for a reason. We now have an opportunity to do the science room correctly, not sometime realize that we forgot to put it in or decided not to, or decided not to spend the money on it and have a second thought another time in the future and possibly convert a room to a science room rather than actually having the opportunity to do it right. So I'm just concerned that why would we think science is not that important? We're always looking to the science for solutions, especially nowadays. Look to the science for our global warming problems. Look to the science for our COVID problems. It is, in my mind, a very important an issue and should not be thought of as a want. I think it should be thought of as a must-have. So that's my opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kowalski.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. So what's driving, if we're not making that many changes to this building from a construction standpoint, what's driving the costs? Why is this a, sorry, I have it open someplace else. I think it was $27 million or so. What's driving the $27 million? Why is this so expensive?
Well, the fact is when you touch the HVAC system.
Sorry, that was just my daughter talking to me. Hold on, forgive me.
What I was about to say is once you touch the HVAC system, it does have a cascading effect on the costs. So what happens is when you're starting to run ductwork and you're starting to run new HVAC equipment, what happens is all of a sudden you start touching ceilings and you start touching lighting and you start touching sprinkler systems. And that ends up with a paint job and you do a lot of other work associated with that, including the electrical power, including utilities that you have to provide to supply the HVAC equipment, including air conditioning and those kinds of things. So it does have this cascading effect when you start touching HVAC. It used to be HVAC was a lot smaller and it's starting to absorb a much greater portion of our construction budgets as these systems become more complicated, as the demands on these systems become more and more every year because of the conditions that we're finding ourselves in. So that's part of it. The other part of it is the fact that you are touching some pretty large spaces, including the media center and cafeteria. The cafeteria, of course, needs all new kitchen, and that's an expensive item. We're also building this project while it's fully occupied, which extends the construction duration and does put a premium on the costs associated with doing the work. If you could get the children out of the building, you could actually build the building much quicker and actually cheaper than keeping kids in the building. So all those sort of factors contribute to the overall cost of the job. And if you've had anything built lately, cost of construction is just skyrocketing. It's just the nature of the industry. It is the nature of the material cost, and it's also a function of where we are in the state of Connecticut. It's just more expensive to build anything down here, as you probably experienced with New Lebanon, recently completed project. And anything you try to build down in this neck of the woods, it is just very expensive.
And only to get it more expensive over the course of the next 2 years before it even breaks ground.
Well, one thing we have done is we've built in some contingency funds and some escalation funds within the budgets, because what we didn't want to do is present a budget that would fall stale within a year. So we've built some additional monies into the budget so that when it does get approved and you're actually ready to go to bid, it's a realistic number. It's not today's dollars, but it's the future dollars of construction.
Got it. Well, look, I think what you've designed here is beautiful. It's absolutely, it would be a stunning school. I have reservations because I'm looking at the number of schools after this, in addition, that need immediate attention. And I echo Mr. Bernstein's comments of how we haven't gotten stuck with an ADA issue on any of our schools going forward. And I have strong reservations in approving a project of this size that addresses more than just, ADA and health and safety and security issues when we have those issues at so many other schools. And we end up in a situation where we pass this through, the BET and the RTM get this, and it doesn't go there. It doesn't pass. And then we end up in a situation where we're starting all over from scratch, doing another project, and trying to get this through and passed, and only delaying further those health and safety and ADA issues that need to get resolved immediately. So I just have those reservations, and I think obviously this project addresses more than those issues. And I think the project, as I had stated back in April when we originally talked about it, is just the wrong size.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I think some other people had their hands up before me.
Well, that's all right. I'm going in order. Go ahead, please.
I didn't understand, Peter, maybe you can explain. You said the building's 21 million. The documents say it's 26 or 27 million. What am I missing?
I was looking at the hard construction costs. The soft costs include the contingency, project development fees.
Right.
So I was looking at the hard. I was looking at the hard costs because that's what I was comparing it to the hard costs that were in the 2018 version of the master facilities plan.
Oh, because in the 2018, it was all costs included in the 40.
I don't know which number that is, Peter. There's a lot of numbers in that one.
No, I went through it. I went through it because I wanted to be sure I knew what I was talking about, right? Because there's another one in there that shows this project with just hard costs in the master plan at only 13 million. I don't think you can look at that. Valid. I don't know why it is that way, but anyway, there's too many numbers flying around. But the cost of this project that we're talking about right here is 27 million, correct? That would be what we would have to get. And that was what was in the master plan schedule of 28 million. Because I know, like it says here, contingency. Every project we've done, we've burned that contingency. So, and project development, professional fees and consulting services, that's architects and what have you.
Peter, just a point of information, that's not accurate as to New Lab. We actually have not burned through that contingency. And in fact, that's the money that's coming back to the town.
Yeah, well, I don't want to go into the New Lebanon numbers because the other one is that Steve Wacko needed that $1 million that we had approved so that they could move it down the hill. But here nor there, the number being requested would be 27 million, right? Or yeah, 27. One is a little over 27, one's a little under 27, correct? That's what we would need to request to have the project funded, or can we don't need this $4 million and we only need to ask the BET for 23. What do we have to ask the BET for in a capital request? 27, right?
You can read what's on the chart, Peter.
Well, we need the answer to the question. Who knows the answer to the question? How much money has to be requested from the BET?
Maybe
Tony,
Joe, maybe you can explain these estimates. It's not for our staff to talk to the architect's estimates.
Sure.
What does that mean? I mean, this is what we're relying on.
Peter, we're going to let Joe answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. The estimates represent the total project budget. Right. That's necessary for the hard costs, soft costs, and contingencies. And these are budgets that are going to last not just to bid day, but basically the completion of the project, whether it's 3 years from now. So there's some future values in these numbers.
Correct.
So my experience has been when a town approves a project, they're approving the total project budget, and that's the project budget that carries the job from design through completion, including furniture. So it's all the money that you need to build the project.
Right. Okay. So the project that we need to request, that's right. That's the way I've always understood this. I was wondering if someone's got some new magic that I don't understand.
None that I've heard.
Yeah. So that we need to, it's going to be a $27 million project. And to Peter Bernstein's point, maybe we don't wind up spending it all.
Correct.
But, you know, the point of it is we got to go ask somebody for $27 million, give or take 26.7, 26.8, or 27.23 to do the project, to deliver this ed spec, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the thing that I'm a little, can you just remind me, Joe, in terms of how the project gets built? Because this is largely a gut job of this building. I mean, it's, you know, I would tell you, if someone came to me and said, over 4 years, we're going to construct part of this building, which is 2/3 of a life of a kid in an elementary school, I'd probably be calling the superintendent saying, sign me to a different school. But, you know, that's just me.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is independent decision. So I'm a little, I mean, can you help help me understand this a little further? And
Sure.
give me comfort around this?
Yeah, no, I
It
mean,
is what it is, right?
yeah, and unless you can offload the children,
Right.
which you're not going to be able to do, and no district likes to build portables because they're expensive,
Yeah, we've been down that road.
right? And it's
Right.
it's a terrible way of
It's $1
spending your
million
money,
bucks.
right? So what happens? You typically try to build your own swing space. So if you have new classrooms, or if you're converting spaces into other uses, what will typically happen is some of those spaces will be temporarily used to free up other parts of the building that can be constructed, right?
Yeah.
A key to any construction project is to give the trades as big an area to work in as possible.
Right.
They don't want to work in a single room. That's just incredibly expensive and inefficient for them. They want to have blocks of space, right? At the same time, you need to separate the tradespeople from the students and the teachers. So you're constantly building temporary walls. You're shifting people. You're having contractors coming from different directions. A big part of the success of any renovation job, of course, is the efficient use of the break periods. So sometimes boards will extend the summer break a week or two as much as they can. And that's when the contractors go in and really attack the building. And typically that's some of the big spaces that they attack, and they get those things done. You can't do it in the first summer because you don't have any of the parts and pieces that you need.
Not just like space.
The
Right.
second summer, third summer, those are the times when they can get in there and they can do that work because they're all mobilized. They've got all the pieces and parts. They know the building. They've already accommodated all the things that they need to do, the connection points, the pipes, all that stuff, and they just go to it. And that's typically how it's done.
Yeah.
But it's never easy. It's always tough when you have a building like this.
Okay. What I was that helps me. Thank you. What I was gonna say is I'm concerned about some things that got thrown out there as kind of facts. And I just want to encourage my colleagues, these decisions are big decisions, and they're expensive decisions, and they're connected to other things. I remember when I first joined the board, we were dealing with Glenville, and then along came Mesa, and boy, going through those projects, and then figured out what I really didn't know about any of this. And I now know more about it than I probably care to know, because I'm never going to be building school buildings after this year. But, I'm a little worried with some of the things that got said, like we talk about capacity, right? We now know we're on a downswing in terms of total enrollment in the district. And all you have to do is look at the numbers, and the place we're most down is in elementary. This idea that all of a sudden these students are going to show up, the New York students already showed up. And guess what? We're still down. And we don't know where those students went. In this school specifically, we were supposed to have 323 students this year. We've got 275. That's 50 students, 48 students, okay? And if you look at the projection that's done by people who forecast this, we pay money to people to forecast this stuff to us, people who are experts at this, educational consultants, brought to us by architects. And the projection for Julian Curtis is that whatever the enrollment is, it's flat for at least the next 8 years, which is the planning horizon that the state of Connecticut requires. So, I mean, I'd love to have more students in this school. I just don't know where they're going to materialize from. So I think we do need to look at the capacity and the capacity plans that are under this. It's an inconvenient fact. I think we thought we'd be at 320 kids roughly, but the reality is we're not. And we need to take that into account when we think about this project. The other thing is, I'm where Joe is. I mean, I'd love to have a science room. But by the way, folks, next generation science standards at elementary school, we've been implementing those in the district for the last 7 years or more. So we talk about it like it's something new that's about to happen. I can remember when I came on the board and Sheila Saval, wonderful as she is, was bringing in whoever from the University of Connecticut, the science guys, they were showing us science projects. So stuff is not new. And I will tell you, I want a science room for JC, but let's get real here. You know, the highest performing elementary school in the district doesn't have a science room because they have no space for it. And so this idea that we're somehow taking the food out of the mouths of babes, just need to be, there's more than one way to skin the cat. And the last thing that I'm concerned about is I'm really concerned about when someone just said neighborhood preschool. You should be able to go to the preschool in your neighborhood. Newsflash, okay? Most kids who go to preschools in this town, they don't go in their neighborhood. Okay, they go to the schools that they can based upon where they're located. We have excess space as an example where we could be putting it in places that are not very far away. Yes, it would be great if I could walk to North Miami School with a preschooler, or you could walk to Riverside School with a preschooler. That would be great. I am a little worried though, you know, on the idea of expanding the preschool program. I've said this before. If we want to have a conversation about dramatically expanding universal pre-K in Greenwich Public Schools, we need to have that conversation. That's a major strategic, programmatic decision. You guys know pre-K from a staffing perspective is far and away one of the most expensive programs we have. It costs a lot. It takes a lot of teaching resource at great expense to do it. So I don't know anybody's going to magically hand us a bunch of extra money for more teachers. I think we have enough pressure in our operating budget. But if we want to have a community decision about universal pre-K, let's go do that. But this idea of building classrooms, build it and they will come, I don't like the idea of that at all. So, look, I think our pre-K program is a great program and it serves particularly kids who need it under mandate, and we have to do that. The rest of the program, we need to have a conversation about it. And if we want to grow it, then the other question becomes, what in the school system are we not going to do so that we can fund more of that? I just think there's a lot of moving parts in this thing. And I just worry that people are not operating with a complete set of facts. This thing's going to come to a vote right now. And I can probably guess how it's going to turn out. But I'm in the same place. I would love to have this building and money be no option. And don't be concerned about any other elementary schools in the district. Don't be concerned about our enrollment. Don't be concerned about how to build it. I'd vote for this in a second. But knowing what I know, I'm really concerned that we've got stars in our eyes on this project. People are going to vote for it. The school community will get really excited about it. It won't get through, and we haven't talked about what the other priorities are in the district that also have to be funded. Like we need ADA disability fixes everywhere, not in 2 schools, in 5 schools, and we need it yesterday. COVID has raised the awareness on air quality for students and staff. It was a major thing called out in the plan. I don't think that can wait. I think that's become more urgent. So we really need to be thinking about the trade-offs here. And I would just ask all of you to think long and hard. Is this the right spec? Or is something a little bit more modest that we can get approved quickly and can get done is the right project? I don't know how I'm going to vote. I want to hear what other people have to say, but I'm very, very concerned.
All right, thank you. Ms. Downey.
I'm going to follow up a little bit on what Karen Kowalski said earlier about kind of the basics. And I guess this is kind of a question to Joe about what we've talked about, you know, air quality, accessibility, those things. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, that the plan you presented us previously, before we started getting into all the discussions about the corridor and the science room, is that plan but for the addition of 2 classrooms? Is that correct? I mean, and I'd actually be interested in hearing Karen's point of view on it, because I'm just trying to kind of understand where she's coming from. But like, because but for those 2 classrooms, it seems that the rest of the project is really about accessibility, air quality, security, and those issues. So I kind of would like to hear, I have another point after that, but I'd like to hear from Joe and from Karen K.
I assume you mean Joe Kelly, right?
Joe, I mean, no, Joe, Joe Costa.
Me? Oh, okay, yeah, no.
No, I'm saying because what you have in here
Right.
before we got onto this whole discussion about
Right.
the science in the corridor.
Yeah.
What we were talking about in the last iteration, you know, you can have a dispute about whether we need these extra 2 classrooms, but
Right.
the rest of the project, it was my understanding, is that kind of the basics of
Yeah.
what we talked about. If you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if I could cover this part of the building with my hand, everything that you see from this point to the left, first floor and second floor, is the ADA, is life safety, is HVAC, is accessibility. It's all those things that you mentioned, which is the sort of core of the project.
Right. And then, you know, and then and I'm not going to balance, is that because we're already doing work to move that kindergarten classroom, adding the 2 pre-Ks is not kind of a huge cost component to it.
No, it's not, but it is a cost associated
no,
with it, because it's several thousand square feet, and it's some corridor and some other stuff that's associated with it. Yeah.
Right. But you're probably talking, you know, unlike the other part we're talking about, you're under $1 million for those 2 classrooms. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, you probably under $1 million for those 2 classrooms. Exactly.
Okay. I mean, Karen, is that kind of where your head is? I mean, just if you could just, I want to understand.
So
yeah,
that's where my head is. My concern is, one, I agree, we have to, if we're adding pre-K classrooms, the conversation should not be here. It needs to be a broader conversation about whether or not that's what we're going to do. Because one, it's very expensive. And even Ann Carabella said in a couple meetings ago when she gave her enrollment report, those students don't stay. You see those numbers in pre-K, but you don't see them translating into, you know, the numbers in kindergarten. So those kids aren't staying. So I kind of call issue with, the community, pre-K and being able to walk. Maybe they'd like to walk for that year, but they're not walking for the next 5 years when they continue, or 6 years through elementary school, because they're not sticking around.
But the rest of the project, that is now, okay, I totally hear, I understand your point of view on that. I'm just trying to understand your point on the rest of it.
Yeah, and so that's my point. That's my point there, because I think I'd rather be spending money on, the middle school teachers, special ed teachers, and high school teachers, which we desperately need, because we're in shortages there. And I don't see that. And pre-K requires an enormous amount of teachers because of the student to teacher ratio that you're required to have by the state.
No, but back to the building. Yeah, that's
back
really
to
where
the
I was going.
building. But back to the building component is, I think we need to have the basics, and I need to understand what's driving the numbers. And I have a hard time trying to comprehend how the HVAC system in this building becomes so expensive when we're about to vote on an HVAC system replacement in Cobb, and that is going to cost us $1.5 million.
Well, that's a different, I mean, that's a replacement versus a renovation.
Well, but why can't we do that here and get a new HVAC system that's exactly what we need? You see what I'm saying? It's like, I hear you. It's like, oh yeah, I'd love to have, I don't know why the difference when I'm looking, and I don't know what the HVAC system here is, but if that's the driving cost in all of this versus the classrooms, I'd like to understand why it's acceptable in Cobb to put in a system that we're about to vote on for 1.5 million. And my guess is that this one is not 1.5 million.
Well, I don't know if, I mean, and
I'm just guessing based on the 27, and I see his smile on his face, so.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what Cobb has, but it sounds like you're replacing a component of the HVAC system.
Yeah.
At this building, you have no HVAC.
HVAC building.
There isn't any. So you're basically starting from scratch, and you're basically installing a HVAC, a heating, ventilating, air conditioning system with controls, basically from scratch, as if nothing exists.
In the rooms, right?
There's unit ventilators that are not even allowed by the state anymore.
Oh, okay, but
in the classrooms that Jay's
in the classroom.
It's Christina's turn, so let's.
Okay. No, so right. So the difference is here we're creating a whole new set. We're putting central air in our house that never had it versus just replacing the condenser.
Exactly. So if you had ductwork, right, you'd be able to connect HVAC to a piece. You don't even have a piece of ductwork.
No. So because the point I was trying to make in a very roundabout way was that the 25-ish number is basically the base number. If you and you could take out those, even if you took out those 2 pre-K classrooms, you'd still be at 24. Ballparking it. I'm just off back of the envelope, right, Joe?
That's the range.
I mean, just
That's the range that you're in for a basic project that describe those services and those improvements across the building.
Okay. And then my other question, and I don't know if this is maybe, I agree that I think a science room would be a great room. However, to the extent we have, and I'm just giving an example, if we have other schools have repurposed existing gen ed classrooms and turned those into science rooms, and if the enrollment in this building goes as projected in the enrollment report we read last month, there will be additional gen ed classrooms, one of which could be repurposed into a science room. Correct?
Yeah,
Tony?
in fact,
Somebody
yes.
go, whoever.
No, in fact, this particular scheme that we showed you is actually repurposing a kindergarten classroom into a science room.
Right. So we, regardless of whichever plan it is, we could, because you were just giving the example that there's 3 classrooms per grade for gen ed.
Right.
But I'm just going to use next year in our budget, we only have, instead of 15, we have 13 classes.
Yeah.
So we've already got excess classroom capacity to get to that science room, perhaps in a different way.
Right. I think what you don't want to do is you don't want that science room moving around the school as your enrollment expands and contracts, because if you're going to go ahead to the expense of equipping an existing room into a science room, because it's going to have sinks, it's going to have tables, it's going to have some ventilation, some additional outlets, and a whole bunch of stuff. You don't want to move that around, because once you put the investment in, that's where it's going to reside. So if your enrollment expands, you know, you're going to have a room that you're probably going to need, and you might have to turn that science room back into a regular classroom. So typically, if you're going to go to the expense of creating a science, you're probably going to want to use it for all classes for many, many years. You don't want to kind of expand. You don't want to mobilize and demobilize every 2 or 3 years.
I agree, but it kind of, I guess it depends how much faith we have in our enrollment projections then.
Correct.
And how likely they are. Okay,
correct.
Thank you. That's it for me for now.
All right, Ms. Stowe.
All right. So we've talked about a lot. I mean, I want to, and there's been so many good thoughts here. I think I go back to the priorities, right? And it's ADA needs and air quality. And so I like the questions that we're asking here, Karen and Christina specifically. I mean, you wonder, of the 21 million, right? And I'm going to the 21 because that's your hardcore construction cost. I know there's the soft cost on top of it. But of the 21 million, it seems like we're around 18 or 19 or something like that. I mean, I'd love to see it broken out, but whatever, we're in the zone. That is for our priorities, right? ADA needs and air quality. And I know when we prioritized this, there were 3 schools that kind of came up first for that, right? OG, JC, and I believe the other one was Riverside. I too would love to see the base number, again, whether it's 2018, whatever that base is that's related purely to those items. I'd love to see it be lower. But now that I understand the HVAC and kitchens, and having done those in an old home and having done that in a more modern home, I can tell you there is a huge multiplier effect on putting something into building an HVAC system from scratch. So while the numbers always are really disconcerting to me, I'm starting to understand them a little bit more. But sure, I mean, to the extent we could somehow, you know, I know we're not bidding this, but to the extent we could find a way to reduce the cost of the base, that would be great. As for the science piece, you know, I worry about the overall budget creep, which is what we're talking about here, right? So if the budget creep is 1 million, 1.5 million, whatever that delta is for the preschool, and then for the science bit. As I look at science, I want to hear from the administration, does this make a difference for delivering the science curriculum over the long term? And you have to convince me of that. And if the answer is yes, then I sort of say to myself, $1 to $1.5 million over 75 years, because that's kind of what we looked at for this current school. It's running about 15,000 a year. That's something I probably could get comfortable with, but I need to just hear, is it the value that we need? If that's the driver, then that is going to help sway my vote on that piece. But that to me is the incremental piece, right? We really need to understand the base. And if the base is really 20 million for addressing what we were set out to do, which is ADA needs and air quality, then I guess it is what it is, because we need to do that for multiple schools, and 3 of them were sort of at the top.
Tony, I don't know if you wanted to respond on the need for the science room.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it makes a difference when you have the capability to have a dedicated space that's part of your science program. And I think that, again, that's why you've seen them pop up at the buildings. I mean, that speaks a lot for itself, where they've converted space because they see a need for it in the building. And it is, I think, in the 21st century, and for a really high performing school district where, our expectations for student achievement should be high. Our expectations for hands-on learning should be incredibly high. And you have to give teachers the tools and resources, in order to do that. And there is a difference when you have a big open space and you can keep projects sitting out on the counter. I think back to one of the districts I was in where we had a STEM lab, and you would walk in, and sometimes it was just toilet paper rolls and just, you know, the stuff that kids were creating, but it could sit out all around the counters and it could sit there. It's almost impossible to do that in a classroom. You just don't have the space once you're trying to teach reading and math. And it just offers a different opportunity for learning for children.
Well, I do think, I mean, at least to me, STEM is very important. And as I look at our curriculum, and if that's something that if that's something the administration is pushing for, like I said, this school lasted for 75 years the way it was built. If we can, $1 to $1.5 million for another 75 years is probably something I could get on board with. But I do have to understand the base. But it sounds like, it is just expensive for HVAC and kitchens, and I get that, unfortunately.
All right, Ms. Olson.
First of all, thank you. A lot of great questions tonight and a very clear presentation. And I echo a number of sort of Mr. Bernstein's sentiments from a while ago. Like a lot has been said, a lot has been brought up. I do think that first of all, I do think that a courtyard would be utilized. Even in the Northeast, I feel like teachers and educators will make every effort they can to get their kids outside, even post COVID, whatever that might look like. I think people will still continue to try and use that outdoor education. So I like that addition. I also, it's just as a district, it's abhorrent that we have schools that are not ADA accessible, and that is why this was prioritized. That's why this was prioritized at the top of the list, one of the reasons. And I think we need to support our schools. I think that there's a need for this, and without just repeating a lot of the things that I've said, I'm generally in favor of these ed specs.
All right, thank you. And Ms. Hirsch.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to just sort of opine for a moment on pre-K, because I know we keep talking about it, but one of the other discussions that seems to have a circular discussion that the board has had on and off for years and sort of has fallen off the table is about reducing the achievement gap, right? And in ensuring that our students are all sort of reaching the same levels. Countless studies speak to pre-K for, needing a pre-K for that. And I just wanted to comment. I think that Karen's not wrong that we don't see numbers showing pre-K students in schools moving to the same school, but that's because we don't have them at every single school. Alternatively, if your student goes to a pre-K in one of our public schools, it may not be their districted public school. So I'm not sure how that argument stands. But the last question I just had is, I've been looking back at enrollment reports from the past 10 years and looking forward. And I'm just, curious to see, it's sort of what Christina was commenting on, utilizing current gen ed space that becomes a science room. How many sections are there now? I know obviously you can't just look at the actual numbers of students because they're distributed differently in every grade, and we have class size guidelines. So just curious how many sections there currently are. Looking back and looking forward, I've just,
Are you asking about JC for this current year?
Yeah, I'm looking at this year. I looked back at the past 10 years worth, and it's just curious.
This year there are 14 sections. And I'd have to go pull if we wanted to go look in retrospect how many we had last year and the year before.
No, I was just curious. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Sharon, then let's try to wrap this up. We've been on this item for
I think we're probably ready to make a vote. Karen, I'm with you on pre-K. I used to worry a lot about pre-K, but I will tell you that I have asked the administrations many times, because I'm worried about all those students that we have that are chronically under standard. We have so many students who are not meeting basic standard, and it's chronic. And I've always worried about that. You talk about it, calling it the achievement gap and what have you, but whatever. There's just a lot of students who are not meeting standard. You would think pre-K would be the answer. The statistic, though, that blows me away is that consistently 95% of the students who arrive in Greenwich Public Schools have 2 or more years of pre-K before they arrive. So I used to think, oh, wow, there's all these people who don't have pre-K. Well, they ask that question when a kid comes into a kindergarten, and it's a really high percentage. And so I ask, who are the people who don't? And the answer that we used to get was frequently it's expatriates who come from a place where nursery or pre-K may not have been the custom. So I'd love to do more if I thought pre-K was a thing that changes, but I don't. And now you're getting into a debate about, do we do a better job, a better quality than churches and community preschools? That's not a debate I think the board wants to get into, because it can wind up being very confrontational to community-based organizations. It's just not a winner. The other thing I was going to say, though, is that what Kathleen Stowe's saying is you do have to think about this over the long haul. But at the same time, the thing we have to watch out for is, which we're not talking about, and it's not a comfortable subject. This year, we have a lot of elementary sections, and including, which was the first enrollment report we got, which is applying the remote school to the sections in the building, which was how Tony did it the first time. We have some of the lowest average class sizes I've ever seen this is my 12th year on the board. So we need to be really thankful that nobody's beaten a path to our door saying, why are you not consolidating schools so that that class size gets more consistent with the class size? We have average class sizes in the teens, and the class size guidelines average is, I think, 23 or 24. So we should be thankful for what we have, and I'm thankful. And I don't know if Mike Mason is listening. Mike, I hope you're not coming to us because we have educational gaps because of COVID. I'm not looking for an increased class size, but I'm damn thankful for the one that I have, because it's one of the lowest average class sizes we've had in well over a decade. So I hope we leave that where it is and then figure out how to work within the buildings that we have.
All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and call the question unless there's a motion to amend coming. Not seeing any hands. So the motion on the table is to accept the educational specification.
Actually, Peter, I was going to make a motion to amend.
Ms. Downey.
I couldn't get my, I wanted to see if I could make, and whether it's out of order or not, to make a motion to amend to make the science room and the corridor options for the building committee to be considered, and that they're not in the ed specs, but we want the building committee to look at them. Is that doable? That we would like them to look at it, but not mandate them.
Is there a second for that before we get into the merits of it?
Can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say it's out of order. You really can't do that. The ed specs are, this is the list of what you've got to go do. So
you should be able to do it, but you can't.
Yes, that is correct. So unfortunately, that motion is out of order. Sorry.
Okay.
Is there another one?
Any additional motions? Not seeing any. All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and take a roll call vote. Brinston is a yes. Downey?
Can you come back to me, please?
Sure. Hirsch?
I'm kind of with Christina. I'm not sure what I'm.
Guys, we're taking a vote here. We've talked about this. This is, I think, our 4th meeting. So we really ought to be able to take action. I'll come back to you. Kelly?
Yes.
Thank you. Kowalski?
No.
Olson?
Yes.
Cher?
I'm a reluctant no.
Understood. And Stowe?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Coming back to Downey.
I'm gonna be with Peter and be a reluctant no, because it's not the way I would be happier with it without, or I'll abstain, but I think I liked
Well,
it.
you got to
I like-
make a decision. It's either a no, an abstention, or a yes.
I'm gonna have to say a reluctant no with Peter.
Okay, and Hirsch.
I'm on the opposite side of Christina. I don't necessarily think we need to add all the space, but I don't want to be short-sighted. I went to a school that was short-sighted when it was built. So I will reluctantly say yes to these EdSpecs.
Okay, that passes 5-3. Thank you very much. We will continue to hear about this. I think the next step is when we get to our capital budget. So thank you, everybody, on that item. All right, moving on to the next action item. It's the Old Greenwich School education specifications. As I noted at the outset of the meeting, and Dr. Jones noted in an email to the board, the documents were not ready in time. So I'm going to make a motion to table that to the December 17th meeting. Is there a second for that motion? Ms. Downey, thank you. All right, I'm going to take a roll call vote on that. So Bernstein is a yes. Downey?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski? Karen?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Olson?
Yes.
Cher?
I mean, I guess a yes. I'm just wondering, how did we even wind up in this?
Peter, it's a vote. So you're a yes. Okay, and Stowe?
Yes.
I think, Peter, just to answer your question, when we took this up at our last meeting, we basically asked them to completely reformulate their documents. They were not ready in time. That's what we have to go with. We don't have the document. All right, so the next item is the GHS entryway. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong meeting. Sorry, I have too many documents open up. The next is the interim capital request for Cobb School. Give me a moment. I'm trying to get the motion in front of me. Hold on one second. Somebody want to make that motion? I just don't have that open yet.
This is to move the interim capital request on Cobb.
Yeah.
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Sure. Stowe.
Thank you, Stowe. All right, so Mr. O'Keefe, would you like to tell us all about this?
Good evening, everybody. So this is a request to proceed with a interim request for 1.477 million to expedite the replacement of the failing HVAC system at Cobb. As you know, this work was requested in the superintendent's 21-22 capital request, but it is believed that the system will likely fail before the capital funding becomes available in the summer of 2021. So attached in the behind the cover sheet are the details of how we got to where we are. There was an RFP that was conducted in early November for a design build of the replacement system. And so the lowest bidder that came in with the design build, adding in electronic controls and air handlers and contingency, comes to 1.477 million. Now, as you know, in the 21-22 request, it's $3.546 million, which was based on the master plan and then recently updated for cost escalation, technology changes, and so on. So, if this is approved to move forward, the system can be put in place before it fails, and if approved, the request in the 21-22 capital plan of 3.546 million would be removed. And if there are any technical questions, Dan is on the call as well. He can take questions.
Hey, Sean, just a question for you on the timing. I know we've already talked to the BET about this, and I know I've already alerted the finance and education chairs for the RTM. Presuming the BET takes this up in mid-December, I think they've got a meeting around the 15th. And
The budget committee is the 15th, the full BT is the 17th.
Gotcha. So then we'd have to get it on the call for the January RTM meeting. We've got to vote on our capital budget prior to that action taking place. So technically we're voting on the same day the BET, full BET would take it up. So I think when this happened, I think this happened with an item last year or 2 years ago, I think it was the boiler at GHS maybe. We may have left it in our budget and then the BET would be able to take that out if it is ultimately appropriated by the RTM. So just just something you might want to confirm with Roland. But I think that's the way we've done this before, just historically. All right, Mr. Chair, I see your hand.
Hey, Sean, I think I know the answer, but I just want to confirm. In the document that's posted on board docs,
yeah,
it says something weird. On the first page, fourth paragraph, it's in the second sentence. Third sentence, the work at cost cover originally estimated 3.4, which has been revised to 3.56. And then it says later that we're reducing the thing by 3.56. 3.45546. I think the real answer is we're reducing this whole thing from 4 million to 1 million. This second sentence isn't correct, is it?
The request we're reducing it from 3546 as requested in the capital request to a more realistic number of 1477.
Okay, so this sentence is wrong. The work at COSCOB had an original estimate of 4.3 million.
In the 15-year plan.
Yes, of which has been revised to 3.54 million for the FY22 capital request.
Correct, that's correct.
Well, aren't you revising it down to 1.1 million? Oh, I'm sorry, 1.477 million?
Well, the capital request that was submitted in early November is 3.546 million. Since then, we now have a lowest bidder that puts us in at a lower number.
So that 3.546 will be removed.
Yes.
Completely.
Completely.
That's what I thought it said. Okay, I just got a little confused by the way that sentence was constructed. Thank you.
Sorry if that's confusing.
Yeah, no, thank you for the clarification. Okay, I don't have any other questions.
Any other questions on this item? All right, so I'm going to take a roll call vote for all those in favor of moving forward with the COSCOB interim request. So Bernstein is a yes. Downey?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And Cher?
Yes.
Thank you. That passes
Hello?
8-0 unanimously.
Didn't even ask my vote. Maybe I didn't want to do it.
No, sorry. I thought I got you.
Yeah. But
You're
no,
a
it's
yes.
okay,
You're a
great.
yes. You're a yes.
Really
too.
good, so
All
yes.
right, thank you. So that's 8-0, passes unanimously. So Sean, please make sure that gets transmitted to the RTM and also, I'm sorry, to the BET. And I guess you can start prepping materials for the RTM call. I don't know what that cutoff date is for January.
It's December 24th, but if
Merry Christmas.
we will submit to the RTM on the 18th, the day after the full BET.
Great, that makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you very much. All right, so moving on to the next agenda item. So it's styled as Board of Education Committee and Liaison Assignments. We're actually only needing to approve the Strategic Plan Ad Hoc Committee for another year. I'm going to make that motion. So I move to approve the continuation of the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, the chair of the Strategic Planning Ad Hoc Committee. Just for members' edification, ad hoc committees are only capable of existing for a year. This will be, I believe, the third year of this committee, which has got a very useful mission. So if there's no comments.
If they deliver anything.
It will deliver. You're going to deliver, Mr. Ferry. You're going to deliver. This is your year. I can feel it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a roll call vote. I'm going to start with Miss Stowe because she felt left out last time.
Yes.
All right. Bernstein's a yes. Downey?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And Cher.
Yes.
Thank you. That passes 8-0. Michael will make sure that document gets posted on the regular website as well as it's already on board docs. All right, moving on in our agenda. Next up, we have a public hearing. This is a public hearing on the budget. We've got 5 speakers signed up. I will remind those folks that they get 3 minutes to speak. All the usual rules apply. We will have the timer on the board. I will try to give you a 30-second warning. Sometimes I just forget or I don't unmute. So we're going to go ahead and start. The first speaker is Carolyn Peterson. So Michael, if you could identify her and bring her up.
Hey, Peter, this is Aaron. I don't believe Ms. Peterson to be in the room.
Ew.
If she is, can she make herself known?
So Caroline, if you could raise your hand, that would help us. I see somebody named Jennifer's got their hand raised. Sorry, we have people. You may be signed up later, but Caroline, are you on? All right. Well,
I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. The next speaker is Emily Trotman. And I see Emily's there. If you could bring her up, Aaron.
Yep, I have her selected.
All right, and if we could bring up the timer, and then Emily, Emily, can you just say hi so we know you're there?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. All right, here we go. Go ahead, please, Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Trotman. I'm a parent, an educator, and a certified parenting coach. I work with families with children who have anxiety, ADHD, and are classified as complex. I hold a master's in education and have been in education for 25 years. I'm deeply concerned about the aftermath in the years ahead as the result of the prolonged stress due to COVID-19 for our children and our teachers. I feel we need to take the long view and support a well-developed social emotional learning curriculum. The good news is that there is a solution. I'm here tonight to advocate that Greenwich Public Schools adopts a comprehensive social emotional learning curriculum called Ruler, which was developed by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. Recently, I have taken a wonderful course developed by the center called Social Emotional Learning in Times of Uncertainty and Stress. This course is chock full of the best research-based strategies on how to get through this pandemic in one piece. The good news is it will be up on Coursera for free on December 8th. I highly recommend this course for all teachers, staff, and parents. One of the strategies is to focus on gratitude. Therefore, I would like to express my gratitude to the following people. Our teachers, you are my heroes. You bravely have conducted classes, shown up for work, and made sure our kids are learning and safe. Our Board of Education for all the work you do to keep our school system up and running and moving forward despite the circumstances. Last but not least, Dr. Tony Jones for providing essential leadership during this tumultuous time. I appreciate your weekly calls and updates. Why do we need to pay close attention to emotions, and what do they have to do with learning? They have everything to do with learning. They have to do with attention and memory and decision-making. 5,000 teachers at the end of the last school year were asked how they felt at the end of school. They reported feeling worried, stressed, and anxious. We absolutely need a well-developed plan for supporting our teachers and students in the years to come. I strongly encourage the district to make a systemic commitment to the social and emotional health of our community. I believe that we can follow in the footsteps of our neighbors, Darien, Wilton, and New Canaan, and adopt this cutting-edge program. I know we will not be sorry, and I am ready and willing to help in any way that I can. So let's make lemonade out of lemons and adopt a ruler for now and for the many years to come.
All right, thank you very much. The next speaker is Francis Nobay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Francis.
Hi, this is Frances Wunobe speaking as PTAC Remote Schools Special Committee Co-Chair and founder of the Greenwich, Connecticut Remote School Group on Facebook. Since starting these dual roles, I've read thousands of messages and personally spoken with hundreds of parents. Like you on the BOE and my fellow PTAC colleagues, I've spent untold hours volunteering to represent our GPS families. Sometimes this effort is spent trying to get supplies like keyboards. Other times my co-chair and I have focused on substitutes, class counts, and screen-free time. Tonight, I want to step back and provide comment on where I see a foundational gap. On December 2nd, we received an email about a district-wide early release day. This email is an example of what needs to change. We parents need to understand more clearly how this early release day will make our students stronger versus a day off. Because national testing shows that American children fell significantly behind in math. Town Linkit data shows similar trends in multiple subjects. National news story tells of skyrocketing mental health and substance abuse issues. With one marking period behind us and elementary school parent-teacher conferences complete, GPS families want to know that their child, whether they're remote, hybrid, or in person, is doing well. And if not, that their child will do well. Greenwich parents are hyper-informed, well-resourced, and paying attention. There are now routinely 500 plus parents joining BOE calls, virtually attending PTA meetings, and actively engaging on social media. You have a rapt and focused audience to showcase educational leadership, civility, and teamwork. Please, no infighting, sarcasm, hot potatoism, or administrivia. Instead, regularly share your data, analysis, and assessment of our district students and your plans to ensure that all our students, remote, hybrid, in person, are going to make it out of this pandemic mentally and academically strong. We need this district-wide report card. Lift our spirits and showcase your expertise, that you know what you're doing and have the resources to equitably execute a complete and comprehensive curriculum for the success of our kids. This is the type of BOE GPS partnership we entrust and want to see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker is Jennifer Zinser. So Jennifer, if you could identify yourself. If you're on, go ahead and raise your hand. Hi.
Jennifer, you're allowed to talk.
You see somebody.
Yeah, Jennifer, you're unmuted. You should be able to talk.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question was actually very similar to the previous question. I'm not quite sure why we're suddenly having half days when I feel like the curriculum has actually gotten much easier over, the past 6 to 9 months. My own children, when we had the flex half days or the flex days on Fridays, my children were bored to tears. They had nothing to do and they were on their screens. Now I just get an email saying, and I have to say I'm a teacher as well, so I understand, the stress that is going on with teachers. But to say that we're having half days now because we want kids off screens makes no sense to me, because my children are in the classroom and now they're going to come home while I'm at work and sit on a screen. So I'm just very confused by this whole concept. And I'd like a little clarification on whether or not this is something that, from what I've heard from other mothers on our Greenwich class, like our Greenwich Facebook page, I'm hearing this is going to be a regular thing. I'm going to have a really big problem with that if that is a regular thing.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry to say we don't respond to comments during the course of the meeting, but thank you. All right, and our last speaker is Carol Sutton, who's definitely going to speak to us about the budget. All right, Carol, you just need to unmute.
All right, I think I probably know how to do this by now.
You got it.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Jones, cabinet, and members of the Greenwich Public Schools community. My name is Carol Sutton, and I'm honored to represent 900 members of the Greenwich Education Association. The COSCOP teachers will be thrilled that you voted in favor of the plan to replace the HVAC system at their school. Thank you for doing that. And thank you to the speaker who mentioned the emotional state of teachers. They are getting through their day in the way that they usually do, with enthusiasm and positivity, but inside a lot of them are hurting and very stressed out. So there's much to applaud in the superintendent's 2021-22 budget proposal. Number one, efficiencies are being found outside of the classroom. Number two, funds that were pre-spent last year have been returned for next year. Number three, the superintendent has made a commitment to upgrade not only some HVAC systems, but also the filtration systems in any projects that are undertaken in the future, including COSCOP School. Number four, the proposal anticipates that the Special Education Review will recommend increased expenditures and has allocated $500,000 for that contingency. We're not sure whether that will be enough, but I'm sure we can agree that it's better to spend on innovation and staffing up front than on out-of-district tuition, litigation, and settlements after the fact. And number five, Dr. Jones seems to be signaling her understanding that the BET's 2% annual budget guideline is unsustainable. This is very refreshing because this is not the way the Greenwich Public Schools have approached budgets historically. So we have a lot to be thankful for and also some questions. Number one, does the staffing at each building correspond to the levels stated in the budget book? The new format and the chart provided in the Q&A makes this hard to discern. Number two, what is the rationale for GHS having 6.4 social workers for 2,800 students and our K-5 schools with 3,500 students has 3, and most schools have none? Is this the best way to support the needs of our students and their families? Not exactly budget related, but is there a plan to assess the impact of eliminating the instructional coaching positions? While we support the creation of math interventionists for K-5, the repurposing of the coaches has left no coaching for K-5 teachers. Finally, we learned last spring that it's difficult to make cuts when in crisis mode. If the BEOE anticipates the need to cut more from this budget later in the budget cycle, GEA is prepared to continue our discussion of an early retirement program for teachers before the 11th hour. Thank you to the board and cabinet for your work. We know it's not easy, especially during a pandemic. We look forward to hearing your discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. That perfectly timed. All right, so that is the end of our public hearing for tonight. We're going to move on to our last item, which is the budget report. So I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. So we did answer the Q&A questions that we mailed out to the board as we were answering those over the last, I think it was last 2 weeks. And that is posted online. We updated as recent as today again, if you were waiting on a chart or a graph. So if you didn't reprint, or if you had a print from 3 days ago, there could be a chart or graph in the Q&A. And I think at this point, since we're, I'll just mention operating first, just to answer if there are any questions you feel like were not clear, to give you the opportunity to ask since we have our cabinet all on. And in addition to that, I would just say that we've tried to be as thorough as we can. And I think you've had a chance now to dig in and really look at the budget book. And we've tried to present a budget that is very, very granular. And sometimes I think that's probably, it's almost overload, but whichever section you decide is for your level of detail, I think it's there in the budget. So I'll turn it over, Mr. Bernstein, to take questions because we did answer all the Q&A.
Thank you. And I do want to point out that at the back end of the Q&A, you've also attempted to answer some of the questions that the BET budget guidelines letter asked. So I found that to be very helpful. And I know we've got a lot of BET members on, so if they want to take a look at that and if there's follow-up, certainly reach out to us. Ms. Downey.
Tony, thanks. Just because this is sprung to mind as we've heard about it tonight and at a couple other meetings, the social emotional program that people are advocating we look into. Just, I mean, are you interested in it? Looking into the costs of it? Well, how does it compare to what we have now? Just because there seems to be some momentum, and I'd just be curious where it falls into the budget picture.
So this program right now, as far as this year in Connecticut, there is an intro course that can be made available to everybody in the district. It's 10 hours and it is free, and it was funded this year. It's really a program that the state believes is excellent, and the Dalio Foundation has funded it for every educator in Connecticut. So I'm in discussions right now with, we do have some educators that are very, very interested in it, and they feel like it could be a great resource for us to actually expand the tool set for teachers. So when we get back from winter break, we're going to continue that conversation and see if we can get as many people that can find the time and the interest to do the intro aspect for Ruler. And it comes at all different levels. You can get to the granular level and have all of the lessons and go into training that way. And then there's also this entry course, which is really a lot about helping children learn how to self-regulate, how to understand not just that there's a problem, but how you respond to the problem. And our staff are comparing it to a program called Second Step. And again, it's kind of in the eyes of the beholder. I think you would hear a different comment depending on who you talk to about whether or not it's highly effective, which we heard that public comment at the last board meeting. So we definitely are exploring it, and we would be remiss not to, especially with the Dalio funding it this year.
Okay, but if to the extent you believe it's worthwhile, then it's the kind of thing that you feel you could find some way within the budget for professional development, social emotional learning, you could manage it, or do we need to be thinking of additional costs?
No, I think right now where we are, we're okay.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's my one for now. More will come, I'm sure.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
I just as an aside, I don't know if the Ruler course is the same course that was offered to us at the start of this year on social and emotional well-being for students at Yale, but I had signed up for that and have been slowly going through that course. So if it is, it's quite good. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But so Tony, I wanted to ask you a quick question. I sent a bunch of my questions over. It's the first year I've actually been able to dig through the budget and really, fully understand it. So thank you. But with the revised budget as it is, we really do have a good idea of what items and programs are on the, are currently being proposed for fiscal year 21-22's budget. I'd really like to know what items that you feel are important and our educators feel are important that might be missing. While we may not be able to add any of those items into this year's budget, it's things that we should sort of be looking forward for the years ahead, what we might need to be able to bring back, what's currently not being funded that our schools need in order to support the academics, arts, athletic programs, and our students and staff. So our bottom line has never been dollars and cents. It's always been our students, their academic success and well-being. So I'm just wondering what we don't have in there that we might need to look forward to in years ahead.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things, and actually Carol Sutton referenced one of them, which are social workers. And I think we acknowledge that, especially coming out of COVID, that's a position that really, I guess it used to be at the elementary, and somebody can correct me, Mark, you might remember, I think it was a 0.5 that was at each building at one point. I don't know how far back that goes, and then those positions were eliminated over time. But we have a need for people to work on that social emotional aspect in our building with children. So I do think what was referenced is accurate, that social workers are needed. I also think, and we hit on this just a little bit earlier tonight in talking about science, but the materials and supplies budget tends to be what gets cut year after year after year. You cut professional development, you cut materials and supplies because you're trying to avoid cutting positions. And I do think we are going to need a laser focus on things like hands-on science. I was in this discussion with Mr. D'Amico in the last 3 days or so, and talking about how we used to have like FOSS kits that when we went to next generation science, they went away. We have the curriculum components, but sometimes giving teachers the resources, and it gets harder and harder to do when that stays flat or it gets reduced. So even within our budget, if you look budget to budget, the last 2 years, supplies and materials were actually frozen in the middle of the year. So even though it looks like at the budget, in the budget that we had X amount of dollars, they really didn't have the access to it because we were trying to close the gaps on things like the special education overages and other things. So that's an area I think that definitely needs a laser focus. I also think coming out of COVID, we've learned a lot about technology integration. And, we were just in this discussion today as a cabinet. Our secondary teachers are struggling to teach 21st century, learning on a Chromebook. And as we look around, and I'm sure those of us that are here in this meeting, there are very few of us in our professional life that use a Chromebook. And so we're finding it's not actually robust enough for the teachers to be able to make sure that they can provide what they need technically for kids. So those are just some highlights. Part of it's social emotional and part of it's materials and supplies.
Well, thank you. I think a lot of my questions were in regard to social and emotional learning and the need for more social workers at our elementary schools. And hopefully through our audit, we will have a better understanding of the staffing, which is why I'm not sort of pushing forward on that. I'm hoping that we'll get a little bit more detail through that. So I would completely and utterly agree. We've been asking for it for years. So thank you. We need to support all aspects of our children. Thanks.
All right, and if anybody's wondering what the banging noise was while Dr. Jones was speaking, that is the heating system in the 100-plus-year-old Havemeyer building. She is subjected to that daily. How it hasn't driven her crazy, I do not know.
I didn't even used to it.
I don't understand how. All right, with that, we'll turn it over to Ms. Olson.
Sorry, it took me an extra long time to unmute. I thought somebody was actually like hammering, but anyway, my questions were actually sort of brought up. I was curious about ruler as well, because this isn't the first time we've heard about it. Is it, and I don't need to know all the details, I'm guessing it's like a K to 12. Is it all the way through? Okay, you're nodding. I see Ann nodding too. So, it sounds like it'd be something beneficial. And if you can actually implement that at this point at no cost or at minimal cost, and it can be sustainable, then I don't see how that could be anything but positive. Social workers, it's been like, I guess, how many budget cycles is this now, Kathleen? But this, I think I've heard, Carol Sutton bring up social workers every year, and because every year, there's more demand and more, life gets harder, and never like this has it, never have we seen this unprecedented time. So, I know if we add something, sometimes something else gets cut. So it's a really tricky game, but if there's a way that we can somehow continue to, socially, emotionally support our students and our teachers, because if our teachers are burnt out and stressed and anxious, as was mentioned, then our students are going to feel that. So it's, it goes hand in hand. And maybe it's not the time to bring up, but I am curious to find out more about those half days that were brought up, if you don't want to address that right now, but I'm curious to see what the plan is there. I know that just from teaching students and having students, that the minute they get some free time, they're online playing Among Us or one of the other, hot games out there right now. So kind of the rationale. And if we're going to expect that, if we can get more, for working parents, we'll need more preview, more of advanced warning and all that jazz. You could address that now or later, but all for the social emotional learning.
Sorry, we're going to keep this restricted to the budget discussion before us. It's on the agenda. Sorry, Megan, but Dr. Jones, you obviously reach out to parents every Friday, so you probably have an opportunity to do just that tomorrow. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention our former colleague, Barbara O'Neill, who definitely educated me as to why we need social workers in the schools. So I continue to say it every year. How can we do that? All right, Mr. Scher.
So Peter, just as from a process perspective, this is the only other time we'll talk about the budget before?
Nope, we can talk about the budget at our December 17th meeting, which is when it's scheduled for action.
Okay, that's kind of like when it's slurry to concrete. Okay, Tony, I had a couple clarifications I wanted to just make because I want to be sure I'm reading the Q&A correctly. It says interventionists, math coaches were converted to interventionists. You're proposing to fund 6 interventionists. And it says the interventionists deal directly with students. They're not coaching. Their role is not any longer to coach teachers. If the teachers happen to get coaching along the way by co-teaching or whatever, that's it. But is that correct? Their job is to intervene directly with students?
Can you actually tell me what page you're on? If you reference the page and the question number, it'll be helpful.
I can't. I took notes, but I will find it.
Okay, I'll go ahead and
hold on one second. Interventionists. Hold on one second. It's question number 40. It says, in terms of the 6 interventionists, you can please explain how they deployed. We repurposed our instructional coaches to serve as math interventionists. After feedback from teachers, they are assigned to each elementary school as a 0.5 staff, half a billet. They have been very collaborative with teachers, administration, working to support these students and teachers who require additional support. I'm not sure what that means. It's a lot of supporting. Interventions to develop skills and concepts in mathematical areas. So who are they intervening with, the teacher or the students?
No, this happened last spring.
Right.
And so last spring, and then so starting this fall, we mobilized those positions out of Havemeyer, which were positions that worked with the teachers as coaches. We repurposed those positions back out into the school, and each elementary school now has a 0.5 math interventionist. So we have somebody to work with children because we did not have that previously in our buildings. We didn't have math interventionists. And Mark and Ann, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, I know
The
that.
math interventionists, Peter, really help support the students as well as the teachers and the administrators. They all meet together on students that are having some difficulty and they need that additional help. So when they meet together and they discuss the child, the math interventionist can tell the classroom teacher, these are the strategies that I'm using, and you can utilize them as well.
Right.
The principal knows, so that when they have any kind of conversation with the parents, they can also help support at home.
Okay, thank you. The other item was table of organization, Tony. Thank you for providing a table of organization. I think it's a little incomplete. Typically, the table of organization has the actual all of the staff and the head count. So if you guys could take a look at revising that, that would be helpful. I think there are some assistants in there that are supporting these people who are in the table of organization. And I'd just like to get an understanding of all of that head count. That would be helpful if you had it by role, because we can crosswalk it to what was in what's been provided in prior budgets. But thank you for providing a T of O. That was helpful. The other one was Tony, or maybe Sean, it looked like in our budget book, and I couldn't figure this out by reading the notes on summer school. It looked like the summer school budget was zeroed out. If you look in our budget book, it's listed program, but it's listed as 0. I presume that meant the money's got transferred somewhere else.
We are going to use, we have over $700,000 in the summer school RRR account. We are going to fund next year fully out of that triple R account. We have not drawn down that balance, I'm told, for years. So we are funding our summer school out of that triple R account. It's just sitting there.
Say that part again. We're not funding it out of.
We have a triple R account that's called
no,
summer
I know
school.
we have one. What do you mean they haven't been drawing from it?
It's about $700,000, and we have not been drawing from it. That's what I'm told over the years. It's just been slowly accumulating.
You're kidding me.
So we intend to use that account to fund summer school, and at the same time with the tuition, it'll help to, replenish the fund as well.
Could you provide more detail on that about what happened before? I'm stunned to hear that.
Okay.
I mean, can you just provide more? Can you provide more written detail of what you just said means? I won't go into it now.
Sure.
Yeah, and can you add that? That's unbelievable. Okay, Tony, you said 21st century learning on a Chromebook. What do you? That's a new piece of news. What do you mean that isn't effective for the teacher, and that some other expenditure needs to be made, or a different expenditure needs to be made?
What we're discovering is that a lot of our secondary teachers, it's kind of what we discovered in elementary. An iPad last spring was not doing it for the elementary teachers, and so they had to have laptops this year. We're finding the same thing in secondary, in that when you're operating off of a Chromebook, everything's in the cloud, but there are a lot of actually even the cloud products that don't work as well as they do when you're on like a regular PC. There are things that they can't do. And if you actually look at our teachers who are full remote right now, and Mark can probably speak to this better than I, a lot of them are using 2 computers at the same time. What they're being asked to do is pretty complex, and a Chromebook is not a robust device for work for a professional.
Okay, that doesn't make any sense, but okay. I'd love to get. First of all, I never understood this with elementary teachers, because all of them had desktops in addition to their iPads. I never understood that, because I know they have them all on their desks. They have a machine in the building that is not their iPad. So I never understood why. It's fine that we gave them laptops too, but now they're walking around with 3 devices.
Well, I think if you could see them teach, you'd probably have a better understanding too, because you do have to be mobile. And we have teachers right now that are being quarantined for 2 weeks, and to take their desktop home if they get quarantined for 2 weeks.
Tony, I'm with you 100%. When you guys were talking about the technology that you were using, I asked this question last spring, and I was promptly dismissed. And I don't think we acquired or have budgeted properly for technology for a joint shared classroom. There should be a monitor at the front of the classroom. There should be one at the back of the classroom, so that a teacher can, there's models of this thing. There's no invention in Greenwich required. There's school systems who, as part of their COVID planning and their remote distance planning, they made special expenditures to properly equip classrooms so that they have 2 screens, one for students, one for content, so that students could properly participate in the classroom. I agree with you 100%. What I'm concerned about is it's a little bit of a drip here, instead of a coordinated plan to have a properly configured technology classroom. There should be, as an example, a camera attached in every single ceiling. There should be a microphone on every single teacher. There should be microphones in the room so that remote students in a shared classroom can hear the other students. I'm just concerned all that stuff isn't planned out. We're 6 or 7 months in. I haven't seen a plan for it, and I don't see it in any budget request, even though the BET has said they will fund special COVID related expenses. So I hear what you're saying, but as someone years and years in IT, when they say Chrome isn't industrial strength for a classroom, that part just doesn't make a lot of sense. But
I
But anyway,
Peter.
someone maybe can explain this further, because we're talking about budget. And what I'm just concerned about is that I don't see in this budget a budget request to upgrade technology in the classroom. And I believe that at least in some of our classrooms, the teaching model needs to completely change. COVID has forced that. And I realize everybody's pining to go back to the old classroom. But I think we should be thinking through strategically technology in the classroom and kind of vision what comes after COVID. And I'm worried that that request is not in this budget. So it's working on an assumption that we're just going to slide back to old style post-COVID. And I just don't think from a budget perspective, that's a good assumption. So I see that as kind of missing in this budget.
Yeah, if I may address that, we actually did have a plan coming into the year. We added webcams, we added the tripods, we added the microphones. We don't need a monitor in the front because we have a smart board, which actually does the same thing.
I understand that part.
Desktops, they do have desktops, they do have their Chromebooks. This is just feedback from our staff saying, and again, if you've never tried to run off of a Chromebook full time, I encourage you to do it, because the ones that we buy, I mean, I would encourage you to try it. That's why I think you referenced your child put theirs in the closet, and there's a reason for that, and it's because they're not, they're not that great compared to a PC. So I'm just sharing that the question was, is there anything that's not in this budget? And I was acknowledging that that we need to start thinking about for our professionals, because I fully expect when we come back from out of COVID, our new normal is going to look different. And we're excited about that as educators, because one of the silver linings, I think, from COVID is it's pushed us as an entire population of educators well into the 21st century. Everybody learned new skills, including the way that we're meeting tonight. And I don't see.
I'm worried. I agree with all that. And I'm glad to hear you say that, but I'm worried that if the money's not in the budget now and we can't explain it now, we're gonna have to wait a whole nother year. So that's the part I'm concerned about.
If the board wants to increase the budget, we will absolutely support your.
Well, this would be capital.
So we would support that if you want to make a motion to increase the budget to add.
Well, I would only make a motion if I saw a plan, and I just didn't see a plan. So, okay. Can I'll just try to move on. There's the comments I was going to make about the budget in general is I don't know that we need to spend more money in the operating budget. However, this is more for my colleagues. I don't believe the money is allocated correctly. I'm new to the curriculum committee, and Karen Hirsch and I are both new to that curriculum committee. And now that it's come back, one of the things that's very, very obvious is the fact that we have reduced the number of people doing curriculum work and curriculum coordination over the last 5 years. As well as that's really impacted what's happening in terms of curriculum development and what resources teachers are actually getting, which they need. It should come central. It shouldn't be that they have to go home at night and start to figure this stuff out by hunting around on the internet. That was a crazy approach to curriculum and supporting teachers. And, governing the system, I think we as a board should be saying that's not acceptable. So therefore, we need to resource having that. And I think it's gotten cut back and it's not properly resourced. The other thing is, it is coming through loud and clear that rolling out curriculum without proper coaching support and proper professional development is seriously hurting our teachers. So I'm concerned in the budget, Tony, and I understand the constraints, I'm not comfortable with the headcount allocation and with the dollars allocated for teacher supports and professional development and curriculum development. I'm also, I'm not wild about the way you've got it organized. It's not, doesn't make sense, but that's not a money issue. And since we're talking about money and budgets, I want to keep it focused on that. So I don't know if you guys want to take that on board and consider proposing some kind of adjustment. Maybe I'm the only one who's concerned about it, but when you—
Can I just ask, Peter, are you concerned it's too high or too low? Like when you say you're concerned
I'm
about
concerned
it,
that there's not enough, it's too low.
Okay, thank you. No, that's just helpful.
It's too low. I mean, I'll give you an example. Part of the reason we find out with this textbook, we bought Math in Focus, and we're like, well, they're saying, well, teachers didn't really use it. Well, and when you ask the question, well, why not? The answer was, oh, well, they only paid for 1 year of professional development, and then the prior curriculum development. This is long before Tony and Mark, well, Mark was here, but none of them were responsible for this. Said, oh, well, the idea was that coaches would pick that up and it was kind of done. Well, guess what? Now we find ourselves in a place where we are looking to replace textbooks, not only because the online version is using old technology and we need an upgrade, but we're looking at potentially tossing the whole program because teachers didn't wind up using it. And that's because they were not properly supported. Now, my take on that is you learn from that and you don't repeat that error. So I think what's happened here is we had a succession of superintendents who told us cutting back on this was going to be okay, and it turns out it's not. So it's up to the superintendent to decide how to propose that. But I'm just looking at the budget, and my feedback is, based upon what I know, we don't have this properly organized and we don't have it properly funded. I don't know what trade-offs have to happen to make it come back into proper balance, but I'm just listening to what the educators who are interacting with the curriculum committee are saying, and it comes through loud and clear. I think it also came through, and I'll end on this point, so I'm not diatribing. I heard Carol Sutton bring it up. So that's telling me it's triangulating. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we need to fly over this target again.
Yeah, I might just address this a little bit. I do think on the curriculum aspect, I do think we're okay. We would not bring a budget that we didn't feel like we could support. I think we were trying to support multiple different models, very, very expensive consultants to do professional development, as well as having an expensive coaching model. And quite frankly, if we're going to have 2% budgets like we've had, something had to give along the way. And obviously that supplies and materials is an area that kept getting cut. And that's why our textbooks are too old. And part of why, there are components that aren't user friendly anymore because they're out of date. They're not, they're not 2021 kind of materials. So I feel good about, where we are as far as, and I asked Mark for this question about math. And so you feel free to speak to that, Mark, but we feel like we're going to be able to support our teachers in the rollout of our new math curriculum.
Yeah, I agree, Tony.
Mark,
obviously, I would like to ask for more, but we're within a 2%.
Go ahead, Mark.
I don't want to get into this debate. Tony, if this is your proposal and you think you can do it and no additional supports are needed for the teachers, then, I'm not going to debate that, but I'm just sharing the observations that are coming through. But if that's what
I do think that you referenced something, Peter, that is, I think that is worth acknowledging. And when you change superintendents frequently, it does become more difficult because sustainability in the leadership role is important. And a prime example would be when we go to adopt textbooks, whoever's behind helping push that through at the district level. You want to have consistency because they should be providing that professional development as part of those materials, and it shouldn't cost us one thing or very minimal. That is part of choosing a product. That should be part of us actually moving in the direction of by whatever we select. So I think we've missed out on some of those opportunities maybe in the past because
Okay.
it wasn't as consistent.
Well, the thing that's troubling me, Tony, about that is that, we did have consistency. We had a curriculum K-12 director, and this has been her program for the last 8 years. And as a board member, I relied on the educator. And I'm sure that person then told it to the superintendent. The superintendent said yes. And, we've gotten to a place now where we effectively have two, for four major subjects, we have 2 people. That just doesn't sound right to me. I realize you guys can do it and you do it, but we're not trying to be the state of Connecticut. We're trying to be Greenwich. And it's easy to, if we want to dumb the thing down to what is the state of Connecticut, I think you can staff at this level. But look, you've got to operate the school system. This is the one time in the year where in us governing the system, our job is to set the budget. And this is the time when we ask the rest of it, it's your job to manage it. I'm just concerned that it is under-resourced, and I would over-rotate on giving supports to teachers to get them up to speed on a curriculum. Not 3 or 4 years of it, but we have to prioritize this if we're going to keep rolling out all these curriculum changes. Anyway, I'm done on it. Tony, you've taken it on board. If you want to make an adjustment, I'd look for, I'd gladly support it. If you want to work with what you've got, that's up to you.
Yeah, I think again, if we tried to be ultra respectful of, BET guidance this year. And I'm really surprised at where we came in, and finding efficiencies is something that, I think there was an expectation that we were going to try to do that. And not having math interventionists, for instance, it was a top priority, because if we have children who are struggling in math, and we hear it from our special education parents when they're going through that very first referral process, if there's nobody to really work with our children as a math interventionist, how strong is the referral process? So when you really go back to instruction and you're talking about what's happening in the classroom, I think that always, takes priority. Teacher training is critical, but we have to be really smart about how we spend our dollars. And we would always take more, let me just say, from an educator standpoint, and we would use it really well, but we're trying to be ultra responsible and respectful, I think, of the community as a whole as well, and do what we need to do.
Thank you, Tony. I just want to say I'm actually thankful for 2 things that have gone on in this cycle. Basically, one is you've continued to reform Havemeyer, move positions back into the buildings to work with students, and that's something that we've talked about for a very long time, and you've taken that head on. And I know there's questions about whether the model is right, but this is the model that you've put forward, and quite frankly, so far results look good. The other bit is really, I now have lost my train of thought, but I will come back to it. All right, Mr. Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. It's getting late.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Both of them are more directed to Sean than they are you, Tony. Professionally, one of my businesses is I help power plants hedge their fuel costs. And one thing that really stuck out and I enjoy seeing is what Sean has been proposing as far as energy savings when it comes to the programs he's involved in. My questions are, can we accelerate some of these programs to incorporate more of our buildings to further save more money and reduce our budget costs? Sean, do you have an answer to that first of 2 questions?
Yep, as you'll see in the Q&A, I attached a chart of the 3 LED lighting transactions that we're involved in so far. One of them has been fully implemented at Parkway, and it's great. And it's essentially getting a complete LED lighting upgrade, essentially with no upfront cost, not essentially, with no upfront cost. And the energy savings fully covers and in fact exceeds the cost of the payback after incentive over a 4-year period. So we've done that. We're doing it with 3. We'll continue to do it where it makes sense. And we're also now looking into, working with Eversource, looking into incentives in other than LED lighting, such as they do incentives in HVAC. So we're looking at that as well. So I think there's plenty of opportunity out there, and we just we've already got an in with Eversource, and we're going to continue to pursue it.
So now, Sean, some of these incentive programs come and go. Is it a function of waiting for them to be presented to grab at them, or is it just getting the process to move along more quickly?
Well, I did several of these things in Trumbull, and so when I came here, I wanted to know what we were doing in that regard, and so we heard from Eversource. I worked with UI up in Trumbull, but Eversource has the exact same program, and so we explored it with Parkway. Worked out great, and they're excited about it. They'd like to do more. We'd like to do more, and so we're on a path to upgrade our schools with LED lighting, reduce our energy footprint without it costing a penny to the taxpayers.
Well, as I mentioned, it's quite exciting to me because I sit for many hours a day proposing opportunities for power plants, generators of electricity, to save on the cost of their fuels by hedging strategies and other opportunities. It's nice to see that at the other end, such opportunities exist. I know that it takes a lot of time to focus on such things in order to propose such creative solutions. So thanks for looking at that. And if you need my help or our help at all to accelerate this process, to save more money in our budget, then certainly let us know what we can do to help you along with that process. Second is relating to some things I noticed in the budget book and some discussions I've had with you, Sean, about transportation. It seems confusing. Is there any suggestions possibly that you can make further than you've already discussed that you believe we can make greater savings on our transportation?
Transportation is an area, I've had, a good amount of experience with. And I think there's always opportunity for savings in transportation, multiple aspects. One, as far as the number of routes that we use, try to make it more efficient. And we are constantly looking at that. When I was in Trumbull, we also looked at other areas where, negotiating with the bus company as to how we could reduce our daily rate. And we were somewhat successful in doing that. But back to, are there other opportunities? There are other opportunities. We're constantly looking at it. Vicki, who's the transportation manager, working with Ann, we're constantly looking at how we can save more money. So, and that will not stop.
So in your opinion, if we need to put a little pressure on adjusting the budget to some degree, one of the areas we can certainly look at to meet the projection or the guidelines of the BET would be to maybe focus on transportation a little bit and maybe take up more opportunities in energy. Those are two angles we should probably look at if we need to adjust the budget downward a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the two of the biggest areas that you can focus on, obviously salaries are one. When you look at all of our major players in the budget, salaries, transportation, energy, and then special ed tuition is another big one. You're up at 90% of the budget. So as Peter Scher once remarked, you go for the big ticket items, the low hanging fruit. And I believe that energy and transportation are low hanging fruit, and there's, I believe, plenty of opportunities.
Thank you. That's it for me. Thank you.
Ms. Olson.
Yeah, I'll be quick too. So thank you for finding so many efficiencies. And I've said before that, I feel like this year or, this budget cycle, it is more clear to me. It's more concise. It's just easier for me to follow along. And I appreciate that. I wanted to comment just quickly, I don't know if he's here right now, on I actually have a lot of experience with this whole Chromebook situation. I'll just be very short, but my MacBook Air, I use a laptop, is what's given by our district. We don't have desktops, and it went kaput right before school started. And I had to Zoom. We do Zoom, but I had to teach on a Chromebook, and it was impossible. It was not impossible, but it was very difficult. It just does not have the same sustainability for our remote teachers or our teachers that are home quarantining or our teachers that need to be teaching remote for one reason or another in this district. That I can say for a fact. It's nearly impossible. You do need 2 monitors. You do need a certain amount of storage. You need to be able to move those little faces over. Like right now I have a gallery view. I can see all of you. I don't need to be assessing your level of engagement, but teachers, it's a whole different ball game between doing the chat, setting up your, it's not really possible to sustain that. So whatever that might look like down the road, I agree desktops are actually probably becoming a thing of the past. Like I said, I'm in a district, we don't even have them, but it's whether or not that's in the budget right now, probably not, but it is something to think about in the future. And it is something that's I could talk about the difficulties of teaching remotely on a Chromebook, but it's not really doable.
All right, thank you. That's the last hand I see. Just to remind board members, if you have additional questions about the budget, best to get them in the next week because our meeting where we will vote on the budget is December 17th. So by the end of next week, please get your questions into Tony so they can get them responded to. With that, thank you, everybody. I think we still have 47 attendees hanging on. We appreciate you sticking with us. And Mr. Kelly, I think you have a motion for us.
That I do. My motion is to adjourn.
All righty, I will second that motion, and I'm going to vote yes. Downey?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes, please.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Cher? Peter? I think you're muted.
Sorry, yes.
And Stowe?
Yes, thank
It's
you.
always great when this one's unanimous. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Next meeting is December 17th.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you all.